Hidden Gems, Episode 60. More Stefan Feld games with Daniel Wahlen of the Game Table. Welcome to Hidden Gems, a board game podcast where we review unusual, forgotten, and underappreciated board games. We're your hosts. My name is Chris.
I'm Jason.
And I'm Daniel.
Thanks for listening to our show.
Got a different one this time. Another guest.
Not Bill, not Cameron, but Daniel.
It's about time we don't have Bill on here.
That's right. It's been too much Bill, not enough Daniel. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, welcome.
Yeah, I feel like this show has been many, many months in the making. You and I have, it feels like, been dialoguing since the very beginning of our podcast. We kind of connected very early via Instagram, and we've chatted on and off here and there, and we've talked about this moment. It seems like for many months, but it's finally happening. You're here.
Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty sure we started talking before even episode 0 dropped.
It was back when Chris actually was on Instagram. And then we gave up Instagram.
I don't blame you. It's changed a lot.
We need a social media manager. I tried to get my wife to do it, but she declined. I will say, running a full-time podcast with all the editing and all the game playing and all that, and then trying to manage social media, I totally get why companies have social media managers now. I would never make fun of it because it is like a job. When I first started on Instagram, when we were trying to get some traction, I was on there like 3 hours a day, just trying to post
every game and all that.
Taking pictures, just trying to get people to notice us. And then pretty early on, I guess it was before our first actual drop, Daniel reached out to me through instant messaging through Instagram. I was like, I love the premise of your show.
Sliding into your DMs, man.
That's right. The lingo. Yeah, so I told the guys, I was like, guys, you are not going to believe this. This guy just reached out to me today. He's got like 35,000 followers on Instagram. It's crazy.
We had like 4.
Props to how many episodes are you guys in now? I know you just said it.
This is episode 60. So,
yeah,
which
that's
is
a
crazy
long
to
time.
think. 2.5 years, right, Chris?
Yep, going on 3. Crazy, it's flown by. We won't talk too much about ourselves because we want to talk about you because you're a special guest, but we do like to give updates, and we're approaching the 100,000 download mark, so we're pretty happy with that. We're far from being anywhere significant in the space, but we're farther along than I thought we'd be. I just wasn't sure how much interest people would have in hearing
That's
about
huge.
these really bizarre games that we talk about on this show, but it's gone pretty well.
The fact that people listen at all is astounding to me still. So
True.
Cool. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, Daniel.
I am a documentary director and editor living in Southern California. There's a really good board game scene here. I would say, board games are my social outlet, my community. I love them a lot. Outside of board games, though, I am a big music fan. I love going seeing live music. Really into alternative, emo, punk, all sorts of rock sort of stuff.
Love it.
Yeah.
Nice.
I also
What's your latest concert?
Oh, man. Microwave. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they're from Atlanta, Georgia, and they are incredible. I love them so much. Let's see. Oh,
Look them up right now.
Yeah, they're great. Have you heard of the Hotelier or Foxing?
No.
I'm pretty sure they're from
Man,
like
you're putting me to shame because I consider myself
Carolina.
pretty up on music, and we go to concerts all the time too. But
Oh, that's awesome.
you're putting me to shame now.
Let's see. A bigger one last October. Oh, no. It was longer ago now. The My Chemical Romance reunion tour. That was really exciting.
Oh, nice.
Love them.
Yeah.
Gerard Way, man, he also does comic books.
Yeah, very cool.
Does graphic novels. He's a super talented guy.
It's amazing. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Dude, I'm going to have to get some recs from you. I love that style of music. I don't feel like it's very popular right now. Maybe it's regaining popularity, but because of that, I feel like I'm perpetually trapped in like the late 90s and the early aughts in my playlist because I just don't know what else to listen to. You know what I mean?
I would happily send stuff your way. I agree it's hard to beat Get Up Kids and a lot of those older Alkaline Trio, right? But man, there are some really great newer bands I think that you'd really love.
That's awesome.
Yeah, Chris only listens to Linkin Park.
Pretty much.
That's the extent of his music collection.
Limp Bizkit, Rage Against the Machine, stuff
All
like
right.
that.
Yeah.
So you got to expand his horizons a little
Yeah,
bit.
I need to.
You're a medical doctor, right?
I am.
What kind?
Pathology. I'm a
Okay.
lab nerd.
Do you get to blare music in the lab?
I do.
Okay,
Yeah,
there we
yeah,
go.
yeah. Well, I'm mostly in my office looking in a microscope, so I'm able to listen to music and podcasts most of the day, which is one of the things I love the most about my job, honestly.
That's very cool.
Yeah. Well, we've heard a little bit about your background. How did you get into board gaming, Daniel? What's kind of like your introduction to the hobby? What got you hooked?
That's a bit of a story, I guess, depending on what you define as the hobby. As early as I can remember, I loved playing Monopoly and Stratego and Risk and chess with my dad, but that is not really designer board games. I do still love chess though. Chess is great.
Did you play competitively?
I won chess lessons when I was like 8, and that's probably the closest it got to like playing competitively. Went to a meet or two, but
Nice.
nothing too serious. My elo is nothing. Let's see. So fast forward college, I played Catan. I thought that was really cool, but for whatever reason, I never thought to look beyond Catan. And, back in the day, we called it Settlers. So
Yep.
we just played a bunch of Settlers and got an expansion or two and whatever. I don't know why it didn't spawn anything beyond that. But one fateful Thanksgiving, I was invited to my cousin's house, and she pulled out Skull, which was fun, and Anomia.
Oh, wow.
And, okay, these are neat. I've never even heard of these games. And then she pulled out Dominion, and my mind was blown. I was instantly hooked, obsessed. I've been on Reddit since forever, so immediately hopped on the board game subreddit back in the day and was like, oh man, I love Dominion, what should I get? And they pointed me towards the Castles of Burgundy. So that was my very first designer board game purchase, and my wife and I just played that over and over and over so much. And I mean, within a month we were in deep.
I just spun up a game of that with my kids this afternoon because I knew we were doing Feld. And I was like,
Nice.
I'm going to get an older one out.
Well, you got Castles out with your kids?
Yeah, we're mid-game because it takes forever.
That crappy Aaliyah version that you have?
I have the red box, not the original,
they're both red.
box.
Okay. The one with the keys on it.
Oh, okay, yeah.
2019.
Yeah,
I got you.
Which I think is actually probably worse than the original because the graphics are just not.
It is. I didn't want to bash your copy, but
yeah, no, it's not great.
The graphics design, man.
I picked it up really cheap at Origins, I think.
Nice.
Jason's been bashing my deluxe edition, so I'm going to bash his crap edition. I know you have to have the deluxe edition.
I had to, man. For the longest time, it was my favorite game. It's my second favorite now. I still love it. And I got to say, man, that special edition really heightened my enjoyment. And, I'm not a components nerd. I don't care about minis, gameplay over everything. But, man, it's just so nice. The experience, everything's well thought out. I love it.
The recessed spaces, the clacky tiles. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, the acrylic tiles, man. Oh, so
Can't
good.
go back to that wafer thin cardboard Aaliyah version. Get that crap out of here.
Well, I just had to give Chris a hard time for it taking him like an hour and 20 minutes to set it up and tear it down.
False with lies.
Wait, what? Why is it taking you so long? It should be just bagged and boom. My favorite thing about the special edition actually is that now there are enough copies of all the Duchy boards that everyone can play on the same one. And that's my preferred way to play because I find it's way more competitive. The tile draft, people are generally going for the same tiles more of the time.
We'll probably actually talk more about Castles of Burgundy later on backstage, more on that in a minute.
Good.
But yeah, that's interesting. We did not play it that way last time. We all played with different boards, and I can see your point. Give
it a go next time. You might like it better.
For sure. Well, since we're talking about Feld, and this episode's about Feld, let's talk a little bit more about the man himself. So just as a little bit of context, if you're new to our podcast, welcome, by the way. It's our hope that maybe some people are listening for the first time because Daniel is on here, and we're excited about that. But we have talked about Stefan Feld on here before. So we had another Instagram influencer, Mitch Resk, also known as Neat Nerdy, and he also wanted to do Stefan Feld in his episode. So we reviewed the games It Happens and In the Name of the Rose. And when we asked Daniel what he would want to do when he came on, he said, why don't we do Stefan Feld games?
He's my favorite designer, man.
Yeah, he's popular, right? So what is it about him, do you think, that just draws people to him? Like I said, it's 2 people that requested him. I mean, he's really well loved. If you look at his rankings on BGG, almost everything's in the top 1,000 or close to it. What is it about him that you love, Daniel?
Yeah, I was going to say I can't speak for other people, but man, I know there's a lot of things that draw me to his designs. Chief among them, I think he hits this really sweet spot between strategic and tactical thinking that I find really refreshing. And that goes hand in hand with pretty straightforward, streamlined rules so you aren't fighting with the game and you can actually interact with the other players. And because of that, there aren't really any long Feld games. They are snappy. And those really are all kind of high points for me when I'm looking for a game to enjoy. I like being able to just jump in there. I like rewarding strategic decisions, and I like it to not take too long.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned the rewarding part. I feel like that's one thing that stands out to me. Is he's obviously not the only designer who does this, but there's so many games out there that, I mean, and great games too, but you're just grinding through strategy and trying to make the best moves to set up for later moves. There is all of that in Feld's games, but I feel like he does a good job of balancing that. With every turn feels like, it's quick, generally speaking. You're not taking super long turns. You're taking quick, simple turns, and you get some sort of immediate dopamine hit, right?
Right.
Out
Totally.
of taking a turn, because there's some immediate feedback, and that's one thing that I really like about him.
Yeah, I feel like he gets a lot of crap for being point salad. That will come up at some point during the podcast, but his games do tend to, not all, but a lot of them tend to be very high scoring. There's a psychology, I think, in board games of you can have a game like Dune Imperium where you're scoring 10 points and you might have several turns where you don't score any points, where you're just working towards moving one step up the track. Or you have a game like Castles of Burgundy where you might be scoring numerous points on a turn. But that doesn't mean that it's any less interesting. It's just, how do I score more points than my opponents, right? And I think there are a lot of people, Bill would be one of these, that like that psychology of, even if I'm not winning, I'm doing something, I'm accomplishing something, I'm scoring points, right?
Jumping off that, I really appreciate how a lot of his games at the end, you can be satisfied with something you built at the end of Castles of Burgundy. It's like, oh, I put this together. Or in Bruges, all the different crazy characters that you dragged along. Yep. I think that's really cool. But yeah, what you're saying about him being painted as the point salad guy, which I get, but I think he is so much more diverse than a lot of his contemporaries. I love Uwe Rosenberg games, but he is very iterative, whereas I think Stefan Feld uses a broad variety of ideas and mechanics in his games that feel very different from each other in a way that I think he doesn't get enough credit for.
Yeah. I think your picks actually for our review demonstrate that, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why I think we hit it off so well early on was our shared love of Strasbourg, which is probably the forgotten Feld game. I love that game so much. It is in my top 20 all time. It is
nice.
Yeah, I love it. It's definitely a top 5, maybe top 3 Feld for me. I know listeners of the podcast know all about it, but if you are hearing about Strasbourg just now for the first time, please look it up. It is going to be very hard to find, but the quest is worth it because that game is great.
You're speaking my language.
One of the most punishing, well, not punishing in terms of gameplay, but in terms of mental exercise.
Dude, you miss an auction in Strasbourg at a critical time, and you're screwed.
Yeah.
You got to really plan out and make sure your dominoes are all squared away.
And that's what's so great about it, right? I mean, I could talk about Strasbourg forever, but how you can see ahead how it's going to kind of play out into the last round and planning your auctions. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So here's 32 cards and 40 auctions. Plan everything right now or you lose.
Yeah. I pitch it to friends as Medici meets El Grande, and I think
push your luck, right?
Yeah, so it has the sort of push your luck elements of Medici, and it has the El Grande hand management. Okay, I just have these cards, let me make the most of them. Yeah, it's just a series of really tense, tight auctions. The area control can be real vicious. I love it.
That is awesome. It makes me even more excited that you're on now. It's somebody else's pump in Strasbourg. It's my favorite game. And I feel like every time I mention it, people are like, Chris is such a nerd. He's just picking out these really super obscure games nobody cares about. But you heard it. Daniel, the game table, loves Strasbourg. You got to play it.
Absolutely.
It came out at our board game weekend recently.
It did.
Nice.
It makes it to the table more often than most.
Well, and it's fast. Like, I don't think I've had a game go past 70 minutes.
Yeah, it's definitely one of his faster ones for sure. I think your group plays faster than ours for sure, and
Okay.
that's a good thing. we're notoriously slow, but yes, I would agree with you. Well, that's awesome. Well, Daniel, welcome to the podcast. Honestly, man, I'm excited we're doing this and really glad to have you on.
Thanks. I'm excited too.
All right, we'll go ahead and transition into our banter, and we're going to have Jason kick us off. But pre-recording, when we were just kind of breaking it down, talking about what we were going to talk about tonight, Daniel said he had some questions or some comments, I guess, for Jason. So we're super curious.
You're
so
in the hot
we'll let
seat
you
now.
start us, Daniel. Go ahead.
I'm terrified.
No, so I was listening to last week's episode, and you mentioned that you are really into roller coasters. I am a big roller coaster junkie.
Okay.
Six
Awesome.
Flags season pass holder for as long as I can remember. So yeah, you didn't talk about any of the coasters you went on, and I want to know some of your favorites. I want to know what your favorite park is. Talk roller coasters to me.
Yeah, we talked briefly about the Hulk, I think, because that's the one I almost blacked out on, but I don't think we went into any after that.
Yeah, I'm probably going to be put to shame here because as much as I love roller coasters, it had been a very long time since I had ridden one when we went to Universal. And honestly, I'm not that well traveled with them, but I grew up in Pennsylvania near Hershey Park. And so I've been to Hershey Park many times, and they have lots of roller coasters there. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've ever been up there.
I haven't yet. It's on the list.
It's a good park. I always recommend it because it's similar to a Six Flags, but I don't know. It just has a different feel to it because it's maybe because it's Hershey and it's chocolate and it's not your standard Six Flags theming.
Yeah, totally.
But there's just something about it that I really like, and they have a decent lineup there. It's been a couple years since I've been up there, but the Great Bear, that's kind of an older one, but really enjoy that one. Yeah, I grew up going to Six Flags and Hershey Park. So those are kind of my primary ones because I've talked about the national park traveling. There is one in Cleveland, I think.
Yeah.
And I really want to get up there and go to Cedar Point while we're up there.
Cedar Point.
That's kind of a
the
dream.
Holy Grail, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's king of the parks there.
Have you made it to Cedar Point?
It's a good time.
Yeah. So that's on the bucket list for sure.
Yeah, you'll love it.
Yeah. I just still remember growing up being absolutely terrified of them.
Oh, really?
Until my dad was like, "You were riding this one with me." We did the All-American Scream Machine at Six Flags, and I was hooked ever since from there. Busch Gardens, Apollo's Chariot, really enjoy that one at Busch Gardens.
That's a good one.
Yeah. It's a very simple coaster, but it
is.
I don't know. There's something about it that's real good.
Well, there's a fun factor to roller coasters, I think, that can be hard to quantify. I mean, there's definitely like, oh man, this one's so intense, it's epic. And those are honestly sometimes not as fun. I don't know if you heard about the Green Lantern, but there was this ride that looked really cool and everybody hated it because it was so bad. It didn't even last 6 months at the park, I think. It looked so awesome. Inversions and helix flips and whatever, but man.
I remember the first time that we went to Busch Gardens, I was pretty little, maybe like 10, and they had just opened a new roller coaster. I think it was called Drachenfire. I think this is like in the era where more inversions was better. It was like the competition of how many inversions could you have. And I think this thing had like 7 consecutive loops or something like that. It was nuts. I didn't ride it because I wasn't tall enough at the time, but I remember my brother was in that phase of like my dad being like, "You're riding this with me." And he definitely puked after that one. So,
oh man.
I don't think they have it anymore.
Yeah.
So if that goes to say anything, but yeah. Yeah. I would say the Velocicoaster at Universal probably tops the list for me as of right now. Like that is just a phenomenal coaster, from the theming to like how they set up the line and all that, which usually doesn't matter to me that much, but I don't know. The whole experience is just really well refined, and the coaster itself is fantastic. So
I think from at least a Universal standpoint, which is where you just were, Jason, I think the Hagrid's ride is probably my favorite.
Really?
Yeah.
That one, I don't know. I enjoyed it. I didn't enjoy standing in line for 2.5 hours to ride it.
Yeah.
So maybe if I hadn't had to wait so long, maybe I would have enjoyed it more. But it was good for sure. But I feel like after you've gone through it once and you kind of know the tricks, right? Because it's one of those story roller coasters where like things happen that you don't expect. I won't give it away.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
But
like the Yeti on Matterhorn. in his hand.
Exactly. That one I also really like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the thing I like the most about Hagrid's is it's a smooth ride. I'm just finding I'm getting ready to turn 42, so I'm getting a little older, and I just can't tolerate the rickety rough rides. Like there are a lot of wooden roller coasters at Hershey Park actually, and it about killed me. I mean, honestly, it about killed me. I just cannot do those anymore, which is
If
what
y'all
makes me
rode the
nervous about
Wildcat,
Cedar Point because I think
the
they have a lot
Wildcat
of
still
wooden
there? If y'all rode
they had
that,
it
that
closed,
one was
actually.
Yeah, that one I think got so rough that they shut it down because even in high school, that one would rattle your brain around a little bit.
So what they've been doing recently, kind of the trend, and I love it, is making these hybrid coasters that retain the shape and form of the wooden coaster, but it's on steel. And so it's smooth, but you get all the thrills of the wooden coaster, which I really love those designs. So probably my favorite ride right now is Twisted Colossus at Magic Mountain, which it's like a classic. You got the racing trains, and you basically kind of go through twice. It's cool, man.
There's something about the structure, like the wooden structure of those coasters, that's just really cool. Like as you're flying around, you're like all weaving through beams. Like all these beams, like going every which direction. I'm just fascinated by the engineering behind it. Is really cool. That alone, I feel like takes wooden coasters to a whole nother level. Well, yeah, I mean, outside of that, you asked me to give my update. I don't feel like I have a good update right now. I feel like work has just been overwhelming lately. So the little bit of time, I guess I'll mention the little bit of time that I have had to do some gaming. I've been playing Mario Wonder, which you mentioned last episode, and I 100%ed it for the record.
No, you did not. You're like 99.8%. He's not 100% audience. Don't believe it. Lying.
Okay, fine. So there's a couple, like, what would you call them? Bonus items or something that don't actually matter at all for the gameplay.
They're like the thing you put the coin in the machine and you turn the knob and a little thing comes out, but
they're called standees, but I don't know what they're for. I will 100% it after I collect another couple hundred coins to go buy these things that don't actually matter.
So basically you're still behind me, so catch up.
Okay, fine.
I'm interested in that because I only recently played Super Mario Galaxy for the first time.
Oh, wow.
That might be one of my favorite games of all time.
Mm-hmm. I was blown away because I've never been much of a Mario person. I grew up Nintendo, love Nintendo stuff, but just Mario games didn't hook me as much as like Donkey Kong Country. Huge fan of that sort of platforming stuff. But yeah, Super Mario Galaxy, amazing. Working through Super Mario Galaxy 2 with my kids right now.
I think the second one is I think the second one tops the first one for me, which usually those types of sequels, it's just kind of like hit or miss. I think Galaxy 2 is the better game though. But
we'll see how I feel when I'm done. So far I like the first one better, but I'm only about halfway through too. So
gotcha. It's when you get into the green stars, it's when it really
I'm not
shines.
there yet.
Yeah.
I need to go back to those. It's been too long. All right. Well, what have you been up to, Chris? Then
this is a good.
Got something new and interesting.
I do. I have a long list, man. I'll have to choose what I'm going to talk about. There's so many things I could say, but since we're talking about video games, this is a really nice segue. I do have one game I want to talk about tonight that I just recently finished. Much like we do on our podcast, I do like to try to highlight games that maybe you haven't heard about or that are a little bit more off the radar.
Like Wonder.
Well, I was going to say, we'll sometimes talk about Wonder or Hollow Knight, but this one is not that. Okay, so this game is called Mech Extermination Force. Have you guys heard of this game?
Never heard of it.
Nope.
Okay. So obviously it's a play on words with extermination, but it's Mech Extermination Force. Okay. So if I were to pitch this game to you, I would say that the game is a hybrid of Contra and Shadow of the Colossus. Okay. Which I think
sounds cool.
Most people have probably played. Yeah. So this game is a boss rush game. So in that regard, it's a little different from Contra. You know how normally you progress through the level and then you get to the end, you fight the boss, and you go to the next level. This game is not that. It just drops you right in and you're fighting this huge monstrosity. Okay, there's no stage. All right, you're just fighting bosses. But the control is very much like Contra. It's a one-hit death. You run around, you're shooting, just like in Contra. The reason why it's like Shadow of the Colossus is these mechs are huge. And I'm talking like 40 times bigger than you are probably, or more, okay, in some cases.
Wow.
So you might be asking yourself, well, how do you do it? What's the catch here? So the way that it works is these mechs, they're all different designs, but they have guns and lasers and or saw blades or whatever, just all over them, okay? but there are these sensitive points on them that you have to hit with like a melee attack, but you have to get to them. All right. So for example, you might shoot his foot to make him lift up his foot, and then you'll run under his foot, and then you'll shoot his leg and blow off this plate that's covering his leg, and then you can start to climb up his leg. Okay. And you might shoot his chest plate off, and then you're like running around inside of his robotic innards, basically. And there's all the stuff in there that's trying to kill you. And you're trying to hit these buttons, basically, to make him explode. And you'll climb up on his head and up on his arms. And you're basically just trying to take him down while he's trying to throw you off or hit you off or shoot you. And there's a lot of just old school pattern recognition going on where you're trying to figure out, when he lifts his arm this way, what is he trying to do to me, so that I can avoid it and not get hit or knocked off or killed, and get higher up him so that I can destroy him, basically. It is interesting.
That sounds cool.
It sounds like they kind of turned the boss fight into a stage in its own sense.
Basically.
Because I was going to say, solely boss fight games, that's like my worst nightmare. Because
oh, no.
boss fights are like my least favorite part of most games, which is usually why Chris always makes fun of me for not finishing games. I like get 99% of the way through, and I get to the final boss, and then I'm like, I don't feel like beating this. I made it most of the way through the fun stuff. I'm done. It's because I don't like boss fights. But the fact that you have like a progression, that sounds interesting.
And there's definitely a progression. So you level up, you buy more hearts or more health, you get better weapons. So bosses that seem kind of unbeatable initially will eventually get to where you can beat them. But a lot of it is not so much your upgrades, although that helps, obviously, but it's like figuring out how to do it. There's a lot of just that kind of old school pattern recognition, memory, trial and error, figuring it out kind of thing going on. Now, I will say, I think it's worth playing. It's fun, but you got to understand it's very indie. Okay. So it doesn't look great. Okay. And the controls are a little, how would I describe it? Slippery, if that makes sense. You know how, like, in a lot of games, like if I'm talking about like a retro game like Ninja Gaiden or Mega Man, where it feels really, really tight, you know, where like The Messenger would be a good example of a newer game. This one, sometimes you'll land on a platform and you'll turn the other direction when you don't want to. I know. Daniel shaking his head. I know. And that is frustrating. And you need to know that going in, that will kill you sometimes and you'll want to cuss. But it is rewarding enough to get through it. But you need to be warned that does happen in this game. Daniel looks like he knows what I'm talking about. But
yeah, I mean, well, kind of segueing into what I've been bursting at the seams to talk about video game wise.
Yeah, do it.
So ever since falling headfirst into board games, my video game playing scaled way back. I just only have so much time in the day. But I just played the game that has reignited my passion for video games. I've been obsessed. I put in 50 hours in like a week or two of the new Prince of Persia, The Lost Crown. And have either of you played this?
Dude, I haven't, but I love Metroidvanias, and I am all over this.
Yeah, please play it as soon as you can. So this game feels like it was made for me in a lot of ways. One of my very first video games ever was the first Prince of Persia on the Mac OS. A little kid.
Yeah. Dude, I played the heck out of that.
Yeah, exactly. I loved the Sands of Time trilogy on the GameCube. And anyway, so coming to this new one, it feels like it's back to its roots in the sense that it's 2.5D.
Yep. Side scroll. Yeah.
Yeah. But it takes that element of kind of OG Prince of Persia platforming, and it's got some really cool, innovative puzzles there. And then the combat is great because I love Super Smash Bros. And it's basically Super Smash Bros. Combat mixed with Prince of Persia platforming. And then it's got really cool, just deep lore and story and immersive stuff that, I don't know, feels like Zelda to me. That is one of my favorite franchises. So bringing all those together into this package that, I mean, you were talking about controls. Man, here the controls are just so smooth and feel amazing. I mean, it is such a great game. It's definitely one of my all-time favorites now.
Yeah, you're speaking my language right there, because I grew up playing all the Prince of Persia games too, and Zelda is probably my favorite franchise also.
Same,
so, yeah.
Sounds like this is a must-play for you then, man.
I need to check it out. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Does it have a lot of the nice Metroidvania features of like oh, I can't reach that area now,
Yes,
but I get
absolutely.
this thing and come back, and now I can get through there and all that crap
Yes.
that I love.
Yep. And it improves on it, I think, in the sense that it brought in this memory shards feature, which is basically a screenshot. So if you're at a place you're like, oh man, I want to come back to this, you press a button, it'll screenshot it and pin it to that point on the map. So, when you're going through your map, you'll be like, yeah, it's
Dude,
brilliant.
That is brilliant. That is a really nice quality of life feature. They talk a lot about that in video games, quality of life stuff, where it's just like things that don't make the game easier, but just make it more enjoyable to play.
Exactly, especially as
having to
an
freaking
adult.
Try to remember, where did I see that freaking thing again?
Yep, exactly.
That's awesome.
Yeah, they've really put in the quality of life and thought and effort into this game. I think it's really special.
That's awesome. I'm going to put it on the list right there with Hades. Right, Jason?
Dude, Hades 2 is on its way, man. You got to get on it. That's still one of my top games.
Jason's been on me about playing Hades, but if I play Hades, who's going to play these really weird, obscure games that nobody really cares about? And who's going to talk about it on the podcast?
You've got a list long enough to tide you over for the next 5 episodes. So I think you're good. I think you're good to take a break.
Take a break, yeah.
Play something actually good for once,
Awesome. Yeah, exactly. Hey, some of them, 1 out of 5, pretty good. All right. Well, I think that about wraps up our banter. Yeah. But before we transition into the reviews, we've been going on a little bit here, but I do want to just quickly mention our Backstage podcast. So this is something that we offer to our Patreon backers via our Patreon. And for as low as $2, if you become a backer, you get access to this bonus feature podcast. And in today's episode, we're going to be going through BGG entries 11 through 20. So that's the BGG top 100 most popular. Numbers 11 through 20. We're going to be talking about each game, whether we played it, what do we think about it, just our brief thoughts on it. And we're going to be doing it with Daniel. So if you would like to hear Daniel's thoughts on 11 through 20 with us, we'll be doing that on Backstage, and we would love for you to join us on that.
I've got thoughts.
It's an interesting run of games, and I will just say, without being too spoilery, I think they're better than 1 through 10 for me overall.
I think I agree.
Yeah. This is actually a pretty darn good run here, in my opinion, but I'll be interested to hear everybody's thoughts.
I'm looking up the list because I don't know what they are. But I'll be prepared.
Awesome. All right. Well, with all that said, let's go ahead and get into the games, yeah?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Awesome.
Rome is in a state of emergency. The Senate and the Guard are embroiled in fierce arguments. The people are divided. Many roads lead to Rome. Whether you decide to use powerful cards such as the Turris and the Praetorianus to protect the power and victory points you have, or instead prefer to use the consul and the tribune to skillfully pull the strings behind the scenes. Whoever succeeds in using their connections and manages to play their cards cleverly will, at the end, deserve their victor's laurels.
Nice.
Nice job.
Very clean.
Don't know how thematic the game is, but it's definitely got a strong setting. Yeah,
that's right. The text speaks for itself. Very nice. All right. So Roma / Arena Roma 2. Roma was published in 2005. Arena Roma 2, 2009, both published by Queen Games. At the time of this recording, Roma has a ranking of 1,554 on BGG, and Arena Roma 2, 1,001. Just outside the top 1,000. Of course, both designed by Stefan Feld. All right. Now, since we have Daniel on the podcast, I'm going to kick it over to Daniel and let him explain the rules to these games.
Yeah, so the reason we're saying Roma / Arena Roma 2, there's a popular variant in Arena Roma 2 that mashes these games together. They're card-based games, and each game has a deck, but it really feels like they were designed to be played together as one giant deck. When I think of the game, the combination is how I think of the game. So, yeah. And it's interesting with Arena Roma 2 how there's a little more avenues for varying strategies and counterattacks and ideas that if you're just playing Roma, I think the strategic field is a little more narrow.
Yeah, and you could get dusted in 5 minutes. We'll
You
talk
can
about
still
that
get
later.
dusted in 5 minutes. This is not a long game for sure. Sometimes.
Right, yeah.
How do you play? This is a dueling game where it's 2-player only, and you sit across from each other, and you are going to be playing cards into your tableau. And on this tableau, it is demarked by these die symbols. So 1 through 6. And then in Arena Roma 2, they added bribery slot. So now you have 7 slots for cards. Each turn you roll 3 dice, and you are going to assign them to these different slots. You can either activate the cards that are next to that die, or you can get money. So if you spend a 5, you're going to get 5 coins. Or you can dig through the big fat deck.
Yeah.
Look out, Arc Nova, Terraforming Mars. We've got a big old deck here that if I went there with a 3, I would draw 3 and then just keep 1. The bribery slot, it can take any die to activate that card. You pay the number of coins. So if you use a 2 there, you pay 2 coins. Boom, that card's activated. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to either deplete the victory point supply. I think there's 40 points. So you're just hoarding them. Or you are trying to make your opponent hit 0 victory points.
Yeah.
And I've seen both of these
Mm-hmm.
endgame triggers happen. I think it's really interesting how you're balancing between those, and you really got to worry about shoring up your defenses in this game because Stefan Feld, Care Bear fans, I'm sorry, this is not a low interaction game. You are directly attacking people's cards, destroying their favorite abilities. Yeah. What did you guys think of this game?
Well done, Daniel, by the way. That was a perfect summation.
Jumping right in there with the rules explanations.
Love it. Real good. Yeah, I'll come out and say, so usually we start with pros, and I'll say one of the things that I really liked about this game was that dice allocation was challenging. And there are a lot of things to talk about when you're allocating your dice, specifically regarding whether you're going to take money or you're going to take cards, right? So as Daniel said in the rules, every card slot has a die associated with it. So obviously if you want to activate that card, you spend that die, right? But what if you want to get money? Because you need money to play cards, right? So it seems logical, and a lot of times you will do this, that if you don't have a better use for it, you'll play your 5 or your 6 on money to get money so you can get cards down. But the more that Jason and I played this game, we found that placing a 5 or 6 on the card space, while you're still only taking 1 card, like you mentioned, Daniel, the ability to dig through that deck, even though it is a big deck,
is
to
huge.
Search for that card or cards that you know are in there to counteract that card that is killing you, that Jason has, is critical because he designed this game really well, I think, where he has a lot of cards that synergize well with each other, but it also seems like there are a lot of cards that exist to counteract certain cards.
Totally.
And so as you learn that, you're like, maybe I will put the 6 on the card slot and go fishing for a card, right? And so I felt like that was a really good decision point in this game.
Yeah, this is a game that for sure takes several plays to start to get a sense for what it does. Because we played it probably 2 or 3 times, and we're like, what is this? Because our games were ending super fast.
Yeah.
And it felt like the swingiest game ever, right? Like Chris would get this super awesome card and like just crush me. And then I would get a super awesome card and crush him. And we're like, we're either doing something very wrong or this game's terrible, right? But the more we played it, the more we started to pick up on this idea that there are strategies and counter strategies all throughout this. And once you pick up on that, the game gives you pretty good means to be able to acquire the cards that you need to counteract things. You just have to be thinking about it.
Yeah. Exactly.
And one of the things that I loved about it was that tension between the running out of points versus trying to grab all the points, right? That was a super cool end game tension because you might be like, well, I'm doing really great right now. I'm going to grab all the points and I'm going to suck them in and then I win. But I don't know. I'm blanking now. There was some like push pull mechanism there that
so
really got into.
Yeah, I didn't really clearly describe it in the rules, but one of the major pain points here is that your opponent can destroy your cards. And when that happens, you have an empty space in your tableau when it's your turn, you are going to lose points for
Yeah.
each empty slot. And if they are going attack heavy, they can decimate 2-3 cards, and you are losing points. You are bleeding, and that can be real tough.
Yeah, so you're constantly fighting this battle of, I need to make sure that I have enough cards down, but I also need to have the right cards down.
Yeah.
And I have to be trying to kill my opponent's cards. Yeah, I really enjoyed that push-pull tension.
I really like the fact that there definitely is luck present in this game, but you are able to plan around it. I mean, you've got luck with the battle rolls, but there's a lot of cards that will buff that or help you in targeting specific types, because there's building cards or people cards. And if you notice, oh, Chris is going real building heavy, he's got his forums generating points, you can find like the battering ram or whatever cards do great against buildings and get the leg up.
Yep. Yeah, Jason, I'm glad you mentioned the victory point pile. I will just piggyback off that thought a little bit more, because I found this to be really interesting too. Like Daniel said in the rules, it's a finite pile. It's the game timer, basically. So a person can lose if they lose all their victory points, but the other way the game ends is if the victory point pile runs out. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, what's interesting about that? Well, the thing is that if your opponent gets a jump on you and gets a better start than you, and they have more points than you, and then you get your engine going, it's unlikely that if they're continuing to gain points and you just start gaining points, that you're going to pass them and the pile's just going to run out and you're going to lose, right?
Yep.
So then your mind begins to shift to, well, what can I do about that? And then you start to become more offensive, right? Now my thought is not, how can I gain more points, but how can I make my opponent lose points? How can I cause them to lose points? How can I steal points from them, right? Like there's a card in the deck called the Merchant where you can pay them money, but you steal their points. And so there are some games where you might have to do that, because just getting points might not be enough. You actually have to like reverse it. You have to make them lose points to give yourself a chance to come back, which is kind of was an interesting thing going on in this game, I think.
Yeah, I like that it leans into that aspect of a two-player game. I hear often, some criticisms of playing games at two-player, it's zero-sum, that sort of thing. It's a different way of approaching scoring points. You got to keep in mind that, any points denial, that's essentially points in your favor. And there's, a lot of different approaches there for how you can win. I like the fact that this game has a ton of variety in the cards, especially when you combine them together. I mean, there are just so many different cards that you won't even see many of them in 5-10 games, right? And so each game feels different. You're doing a lot of the same stuff, but I really like how, just as nature of how many cards there are, it feels very different to me.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Like you mentioned at the start of the review, we combined the decks of Roma and Arena Roma 2. And Jason and I, when we reviewed this, part of the reason we played this so many times is we actually played Roma by itself, and then we played Arena Roma 2 by itself, and then we played it together. And we did find in our experience that Roma by itself can end real fast. A lot of the games tended to be really fast due to forums, which we'll talk about in a minute. In Arena Roma 2, the games tended to be much longer just because there were just more things you could do to each other to kind of draw it out, to keep it brief. But when you mixed the two decks, it did feel like it was a nice mixture. I mean, there's always that chance that somebody could draw two early forums and you don't have one, and maybe you don't have something you can do about it. But without getting too much into the weeds, it did feel like the best combination, I guess.
And I'll cop to the fact I've actually only played the game combined, but I was able to deduce that, oh man, with just the Roma deck, and you see that online, I mean, people are like, well, forums, okay.
Right. And we need to talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but you were going to say something. Sorry, Jason.
No, it's fine. I wonder how much of the game ending fast when we played Roma and getting longer was due to the difference in the cards, and how much of it was due to us figuring out the right way to play this game. That would be my only caution there, because I think we started to figure out, and maybe it was the addition of the Roma cards, but let's just talk about the forum, right? So the forum is a card that there are more forum cards in the deck than any other type of card, I think. And this card is basically, if you roll that dice number for that card and you activate it, you just score like 5 points outright or something like that.
Well, you activate Yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
You use one of the dice you aren't using. So you have 3
that's right.
dice.
Yeah.
So if you activate the forum, that takes 1 die, and then you use a second die that you aren't using on something else, and the value of that die scores you points.
Right. Yes. And I think we started to find in the later game, I was starting to figure out that the forum is actually more difficult to win with because you're wasting extra dice.
2/3 of your actions.
And you're super dependent on like rolling the correct numbers, right? You have to roll the correct number to activate the card. Then you have to roll an equally high number, which on average you're going to get maybe 4 points. And if your opponent has a decent engine setup, that's not enough to overcome that.
I think it's tough in Roma by itself. I think it's hard to overcome. I would agree with you in the combined game, which again, in my view, is just the game, the way to play. That, it's totally balanced. I've seen Forum win out. I've seen it also have a hard time. I think throwing one of the forums into your bribery slot will allow you to trigger it a lot more often.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
Then, you need a good money engine. So lots of checks and balances, which I do like.
For sure. I mean, I'm not disagreeing necessarily with some of your points, but I will say, Jason, unless I'm misremembering, I do feel like forums, maybe we weren't playing optimally, but they always felt like auto plays. And if you activated it and one of your other die was a 4, 5, or a 6, we were doing it every time. And if you have one of those, or God forbid, 2 of them, and the other person doesn't, and you're scoring points every turn and they're not, I mean, it can just be hard to come back from that. I get why people complain about it on the BGG forums. In Roma alone, for sure, it is better when the decks are mixed. But I will say, through some luck of the deal, you can find yourself behind the 8 ball really early in this game. Now, that isn't to say that, like we were saying earlier, you can't dig through the deck and find the cards that can shift the balance and help you recover. But again, you're playing more defensively while the other person is just scoring, right? And you're just trying to come up with a solution, right? And so that can feel hard sometimes in some games.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that.
I think it would bother me a whole lot more if the game was longer.
Sure.
This is a 20, 30, 45 minutes at tops game. It doesn't overstay its welcome, and the factors of luck that are there aren't drawn out enough to be frustrating for me.
Yeah, I did like the fact that it plays quick and it's short. Because of the wide variety of cards that are in the deck, it felt like a different game each time based on what was coming out. Anything else that stood out to you guys that you didn't enjoy about this game?
Yeah, so I think the biggest negative for me is that occasionally it can feel 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And I'm really not a fan of that sort of gameplay where it feels like you're doing a lot of undoing of the player's actions. It's just not fun for me. Thankfully, I don't think there's a whole lot of it, but in the times where I have been frustrated with the game, it's been because of that. And it's just something to note that if that bothers you too, that can be occasionally present.
Like I build this card and then Chris has a bribery slot card that just destroys my card.
Exactly.
And I build this card and he destroys my card.
Yeah.
That happened maybe a few times.
Yeah, that's fun. All right. So should we move on to final thoughts on Arena Roma?
Yeah, let's go.
All right. So before we do that, since we have Daniel on the show and he's a guest, and maybe we have some new listeners to the show, we should talk about our rating scale because it's a little different. Okay. So we rate things on a 1 to 6 scale. So if we call something a 5 and are raving about it and you're like 5 out of 10, no, it's 5 out of 6. All right. So if we give a game a 1, that means we don't like the game, and we don't like the game because we feel like mechanistically or from a design standpoint, there's just something wrong with the game that makes it unenjoyable or unplayable. That's pretty rare rating for us. A 2, there's nothing mechanically wrong with the game, nothing from a design standpoint. We just don't like it. It doesn't do anything for us. We don't enjoy it. There are things about it we don't like. A 3 is what we call the meh game. It's not bad by any means. It just doesn't excite us. It doesn't do anything for us. We're not excited to get it off the shelf and play it. 4 is a good game. It's a game we enjoy. If somebody was like, hey, let's play this game, we'd be like, yeah, let's play it. I enjoy this game. 5, excellent, above average, actively looking to get it off the shelf, showing it to people we really enjoy it. And then 6 is our best rating. These are our favorite games, our top games, games that we really, really enjoy. Okay? So with that being said, since you're our guest, Daniel, we'll let you start this one. We'll let you go first.
Well, to preface this, I have 32 Feld games, and I have a big old ranking of them, and I don't love them all. I can admit that some are masterpieces and some suck. So, with that in mind, I put this right around the 20-ish mark, so right about halfway. And so I think this game deserves a 4 out of 6. I like it. I enjoy it. I'll play it, but it's not a favorite for me.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, I'm not huge into duelers, so I think there are only a few other, like, I enjoy Omen, Air, Land, and Sea. I don't know, but like Magic and that sort of thing hasn't really been my jam. So I could see if I was a bigger fan of the genre that this would be higher, because I think in the genre, this is maybe my favorite.
Wow. Okay.
You want to go next, Chris?
Yeah. All right. So for me, I'll start by saying that there are parts of this game I really like. Going back to what we were saying in the beginning of our review, I think Feld did a really good job in designing this deck and thinking about the card designs and making cards that sing with each other. And when you get those cards down together, that they just form a great synergy. But then also providing you with cards that when you need it and somebody is hurting you with a card, you can search through the deck and find it, or you draw it and can counteract what they're doing. It feels good, right? There's just all those kind of card interactions going on in this game. But the one thing I struggled with this game is that sometimes it can just feel like you're in molasses in this game, trying to find that card that you need. And this is really when you're more in a behind situation, when your opponent gets off to a really good start and you need to respond, or the game's going to end in 3 turns, which it happens sometimes, and you need to be aware of that. Sometimes you can save yourself, but I did find in those situations where I was trying to find those cards. In a good 2-player game, of which there aren't many that I like, I'm not a big 2-player fan, but you should really feel like you're striving against your opponent, right? It's you and me. Battle of wits. I'm fighting against you. And in this game, a lot of the times, and this is no offense, Jason, this is not a slight against you. You were playing great. You were a great opponent. But I felt like I was fighting more with the game and its mechanisms more than I was fighting against Jason. Like, okay, I need this card. Fish, 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 fish. I can't find it. Fish, fish, fish. Oh, I got it. Now I play it. Roll the dice. Oh, I didn't roll it. Oh, I didn't roll it again. Right. And so I was finding that I had a plan, but it was just hard to get it to come together to save myself. Right. And so because of that, I wanted to like this game. And I can see why people like it. And this is why we have the 3 ranking. I don't think it's a bad game, but for me personally, it just wasn't something that I was enjoying in most of our plays, unfortunately. So for me, I'm going to give this one a 3.
Gotcha.
You counterpoint, Daniel.
Real quick, real short. I do think, just to your point of like wanting. Oh man, I needed this die and I didn't get it. This is very much a game where you need to set yourself up so that regardless of the role, you are able to be doing something well. You can't hinge everything on just 1 or 2 slots. The best way to mitigate the luck is by making all your options at least decent.
But it takes time to do that, right?
Yeah, it can.
I mean, I guess I'm talking more about
you start out the gate with 4 of your slots filled. So
yeah, but they could not be helpful depending on what your opponent is doing.
Most of the time, you've got at least something decent.
We're having a duel right here.
That's right. That's right. Yeah,
I mean, did you feel more often than not that you felt behind?
No, I would say, so this is what I feel like happened. So 1/3 of the time, I feel like one of us crushed the other one quickly. 1/3 of the time, one person got off to a quick start and the other person was behind, and they were striving to try to pull them back. Maybe successful, often not, leading to a drawn out game where the person who was ahead most of the time just won anyway because the person just couldn't come up with an answer. And then the other third, a good, really enjoyable back and forth game. I feel like if more of our games could have been that third where they were more competitive, I probably would have given it a 4, but I just felt like so many of our games were either quickly decided or they weren't quickly decided, but they kind of were. we kind of knew who was going to win, and the other person was striving to try to flip it, but it kind of drew out and the person won anyways, right? It was hard to get away from that, if that makes sense.
I think my counterpoint to that would be that I think the last third was happening in our last third of our plays, right? Which means that we were learning more and we were playing with the full complemented deck, right?
Sure.
I'm not saying that resolves all the issues that you've mentioned, because I don't disagree with some of your points, but I would say that I think as we got better at the game, our plays of it got more dynamic and more interesting, right? I'll carry that forward into my thoughts. I jotted this down, so I'm going to read it. We can cut it if we want to, but I wrote down, there's tons of awesome cards, and that's cool. There's some really powerful ones, though, and that's not as cool. But then you figure out that all of those cards are compatible once you figure out what to do with them, and that's cool. But sometimes you just don't have the cards you need to do something about it, and that's not as cool. But there are a decent number of ways to get the specific cards you need once you figure that out, which is cool. But they can be hard to use if you don't get the right dice rolls, which is less cool. So I think all that kind of adds up to there's a good tension that's built in this game, from the end game conditions to these super powerful cards that it feels like you're trying to combat. I got weirdly some Glory to Rome vibes from this game, not just because they're both Roman themed, but that's another one of those games. I don't know if you've ever played it, Daniel. I have like a print and play copy of it.
I would love to.
It's mechanically awesome. They're very different, but it's the type of game where every card is super, super powerful if you can get it to the table and in the right context. So you could win with a single card. There's a card, I think, that just says you win the game, but it takes several steps to get that card down to the table. And it felt like I got some vibes of that in this. All that to say, I enjoyed our plays of this game. I felt like we were learning the game as we went along. The first few plays were rough. I'm not going to lie. Like, I was like, this is a terrible game. I don't like it. But as we played it more, I started to like it more and more. And I think I agree with you, Daniel, in that this is not my go-to genre of game. And I don't play two-player games all that often, honestly. But in terms of the two-player games that I've played, I did enjoy this one. I think for me, this falls solidly into that 4 category as well. I think what keeps it from being better than that is less the randomness of the cards and more, I'm thinking more pragmatically of like, would I pull this out and play it with my kids, or would I pull this out and play this with somebody who's new to the hobby? And I think that fact that it has such a learning curve to it would probably pull that down a little bit of like,
and it's mean,
right? If I was going to play this with somebody who'd never played before, if you play this with somebody who's not played before, you will crush them unless you help them along with strategy. And so I think that pulls it down. No, that is a good thing. Like, I agree. We consistently like,
we love the pain on hidden gems, baby.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. If a new player can walk in and just trounce you, then like, where's the strategy, right?
Right. Exactly.
But I think in terms of, I was listening to you explain our rating scale again, and you were like, this is a game that you would get it out and you want to show new people, right? And that's not the only qualifier for this, but I think that does reduce it down slightly for me, but not enough to take it out of the 4 category. I enjoyed this one.
Nice. All right. Well, where can you pick this up? If any of that sounded interesting to you, if you are intrigued, if what Daniel and Jason said have you wanting to give it a try, and you think that I don't know what I'm talking about, which is probably true.
A 3 isn't even a bad rating.
I mean, a 3, it's all right. It just wasn't for me, you know? Yeah. But if you'd like to give it a try and see for yourself, I'm happy to report that there are several copies available at Noble Knight Games. Noble Knight Games is our sponsor. We appreciate them, and you can pick it up there. I will note, though, that we normally have a 10% discount code, but it resets every quarter, and we have not gotten our new code for the upcoming quarter, which starts on March the 1st, which will be after this releases. So we apologize for that. If you follow us on our BGG Guild or you follow us on our Discord, as soon as I have the code, I will post it there. But as of right now, we do not have any active codes. But regardless, we would still love for you to support them. And as soon as we get it, I will make it known. You can also find these games, both Roma and Arena Roma 2, on the BGG Marketplace. And there are numerous copies available of both at pretty reasonable prices. So pretty easy to pick up.
Cool. those are our thoughts on Roma and Arena Roma 2. England in the 12th century. The players take on the roles of Prior Philip and Bishop Wahlen. Philip wants to build the most beautiful cathedral in England. Wahlen is planning his own project, a mighty fortress. Both players are trying to simultaneously build their buildings. To construct your building, you must obtain raw resources and convert them into building materials. You are supported by your friends and powerful allies, but are constantly opposed by dangerous foes. If you manage to overcome and build your building first, you win. Simple enough, right?
Yeah.
Love it.
All right. Pillars of the Earth, Builder's Duel. Not to be confused with Pillars of the Earth,
Nope.
the normal board game,
Which
I've heard many things about and need to play.
Yeah, I was about to say, I was worried you were like, which is awful. No, okay, amazing, good. Because
No, I've heard so many things about this,
yeah.
and I want to play it.
It's so good. Daniel, just quickly, have you played Pillars of the Earth?
Yes, it is my favorite intro to worker placement games.
Yeah, it's so
great.
good.
Yeah,
It's so good.
We got to get it out soon.
Yeah, man, it's great.
Also, not to be confused with the book, The Pillars of the Earth, although it is based on the same story. And we'll talk about that in a second because I just finished it. All right. Pillars of the Earth, Builder's Duel, published in 2009 by Cosmos, Mayfair, and Philosophia Editions. Designed, of course, by Stefan Feld. Currently ranked on BGG 3,254. So this game is based off of a book, and I'm not going to go into a super deep explanation here, but I feel like it's relevant. The theme comes through pretty strong here. And I just finished this book, it's long. It took me a long time to read this book. It's like 1,000 pages. And
Without
actually part of a
pictures.
trilogy, and I only read the first one, not the whole trilogy. But basically the book is the story of this epic battle of wits between the pious Prior Philip and the treacherous Bishop Wahlen. Philip is a monk who becomes the prior of a town called Kingsbridge, which is a real town in England. And Kingsbridge Cathedral burns down. And so he's working to build a new cathedral. Whereas Wahlen is this corrupt bishop who presides over the diocese that contains Kingsbridge. And he just wants power. And he wants to build a castle for himself. So that's where this duel comes in, right? And Wahlen uses this other family, the Hamleys. They're despicable in every way, but they've been dispossessed from leadership in England. He uses them as his pawns to help take over this earldom. And so it becomes this like battle of wits back and forth of like they have some political victory, and then Wahlen comes up with some plan and uses the Hamleys to like burn half the city to the ground. And it's just this back and forth political battle. So I enjoyed the book. Game of Thrones vibes all throughout.
I'll interject. And when we were playing this game, Jason was getting uber excited about the theme on the cards. He's like, oh, that's that guy. And he gave me like a 5-minute explanation on every character card that came out and how they tie into the story. So, he was digging it. He was digging it.
That's true. That's true. And it's because the story is so freaking long and there's so many details that every character, it's like, well, you're not going to understand this unless I give you at least 10 pages worth of backstory. So, all right. Well, that's enough of that. So how do we play this game? Like I mentioned before, this is a 2-player game. One player is Prior Philip. The other player is Bishop Wahlen. And each player has 3 cards in front of them, which when placed in a line form a picture of their intended building project. Philip's building the cathedral, Wahlen's building the castle. Each of these 3 cards has a set of 3 building materials that are required to complete that section. And these are different combinations of lumber, cloth, stone, mortar, and then one of the 3 cards has a single iron material requirement, which is like, I guess, meant to represent the cathedral bell and the castle gate. Players will be attempting to obtain raw materials. So, for instance, sand becomes mortar, wood becomes lumber, ore becomes iron, etc. And then they will be trying to convert those raw materials to their respective building materials, then place those building materials onto the cards to complete each of the 3 cards before the other player completes theirs. That's essentially the gist. So gameplay proceeds over a course of up to 12 rounds, but it can end earlier than that. each round, a random set of 9 cards is going to be laid in a 3x3 grid. Each player, beginning with the player who currently holds the power token or the first player token, will place 3 tokens of their own color onto that 3x3 grid in a line, tic-tac-toe style, right? So a row, a column, or a diagonal. First player can play anywhere they want. The second player does the same, but they have to intersect the first player's set of 3 tokens. And because it's tic-tac-toe, they will always intersect in exactly one spot. So the players then duel over that intersecting card by flipping seals. Each player begins the game with their own colored player seal and then a bunch of neutral seals. And these seals have numbers on the front and the back, and they usually offset each other. So some tokens have 0 on one side and 5 on the other. Others have 4 and 1. Others have 2 and 3. You're picking a token, you're coin flipping it, and whatever side it lands on, that's the amount of power that you have put towards this duel, right? And so this goes back and forth. As soon as one player has more power, the other player gets to flip as many seals as they can in order to overcome that number. And then it goes back to the other player and back and forth until one or the other players either runs out of seals or doesn't want to flip anymore. At that point, the loser has to take their token off the board, and then both players use the cards that they still have tokens on. And each of these cards does a variety of different things. There are basic cards that just give you raw resources or coins, or transfers the power token from one player to the other, or gives you more seals, etc., etc. But then there are also character cards, and these are either red or blue, which corresponds to the player colors. If you claim a card that is your color, you get to use it, of course, and these are generally higher powered cards. But you can claim a card that belongs to the other player, you just can't use the ability. It's just a blocking mechanism. Once per round, a player can place resources onto exactly one of their cards. And they can put 1, 2, or 3 resources out there. Obviously, it costs exponentially more to place more resources out there. This is what you need coins for. And then lastly, each card, when it's completed, if you were the first player to complete that particular card, there is a bonus on that card that you receive for being the first person to complete it. Goes back and forth, either ends after 12 rounds, whoever has the most built, or whoever builds their third card first. So that is essentially how you play Pillars of the Earth Builders Duel. So I guess to kick us off on this one, probably the most unique thing that I've seen in this game is this whole coin flipping mechanism, which anybody who's listened to this podcast for a while is probably going to assume that this is something that I absolutely hated, but I will talk more about that later. I'm curious what you guys thought about it and how that factored into your enjoyment of the game.
I think it's a cool alternative to dice. I mean, you're battling, and I feel like most designs would just have you chucking dice. I like that there's a hand management aspect to this, and that you're trying to collect more seals, so then you have more coin flips, basically. You know, there's still a lot of luck. You can get hosed, but I think it's novel enough, and the game is short enough that I like it.
Yeah, who would have thought? And I didn't know anything about this game until Dana, you suggested it for review. But who would have thought Stefan Feld would have had a coin flipping mechanism in a game? Like, again, that's why, like you were saying earlier in the episode, Dana, you can't really just corner one designer into a certain type of style. Like, oh, he's just point salad. I mean, he's done a lot of interesting, unique things. You know, Oracle of Delphi would come to mind with racing. And then this would be one, a dueling card game, much like Roma, but with coin flipping. Which is interesting. But the thing that's interesting about these coins, and I'll just reiterate it, Jason mentioned it, is it's not like you're flipping a coin and one side is head and one side is tails. It's one side is add 2 strength, one side is add 3 strength, but there's another one that's you flip it and you could add 0 strength or you could add 5 strength. All right. Which can be really swingy. You might be thinking that sounds swingy, and it can be, but there's certainly, I think, at least a little bit of strategy in choosing which coin am I going to flip, right?
Mm-hmm.
Am I going to flip my 0-5 early and try to put the pressure on him, or am I going to try to save it later and try to hit him with a late zinger? There's some range there in what you can contribute, which can keep your opponent, I guess, on their toes, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure. I didn't mind the coin flipping part of this for as much as I would normally complain about this type of thing. And I think it's because while it is very important, you can mitigate it by making sure you have enough seals to compete, right? And
Very
ultimately,
important.
it really just comes down to one player gets 3 cards to use and the other player gets 2 cards to use, right? Which does actually make a pretty significant difference if you lose continually.
Yeah.
But hopefully, based on odds, you're swinging back and forth, right? Like I might win, but I spent a bunch of my seals, so now I'm weaker. Now you have a higher probability of winning on the next one, right? Unless I'm really focusing in on grabbing those seals.
Well, and a crucial note to that is the winner loses their coin and the loser gets to keep one, which
Yeah.
can be a leg up.
Yeah.
And there was an interesting design choice too that I noticed, which was really brilliant, in that the first player has to flip first, right? So they win ties, but that will force them to flip a neutral seal, right? Like you don't know what the other person is going to do. They might flip their colored seal, which means their turn ends immediately, or they might flip a neutral seal. But if you want to make sure you're not done after one flip, it kind of forces you to flip a neutral seal, and then the other player might flip their colored one. But basically, the point I'm making is if you're leading off with the flipping, you can't just flip your colored seal safely. You're forced to spend one right out of the gate, pretty much, unless you don't care about losing that card. If that makes sense.
I guess to just tack onto that, because I'm not sure I explained it well in the rules explanation. Every player has a colored seal, which is like your permanent seal. You always have it. And as soon as you flip that one, you're done. You can't flip anymore. The neutral ones are gray, and you can flip those if you want to, but you have to flip them before you flip your colored one. And
right.
You don't get those back if you win. And so you could, as the leader, flip your colored seal, but then you're just saying, I'm only flipping one. And it's easy for the opponent to come over you. So you have to flip that neutral one. And your opponent could just be like, well, I'm just going to flip my colored one because I don't really care about this battle.
Force you to spend that.
They don't lose anything, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. That makes it more clear. Yeah.
I did a better job than you. You're right.
You did.
All right. So the other thing I wanted to touch on in this is this 3x3 card grid, because I thought this was really interesting.
Yeah.
It made for some really interesting decisions because the way that those cards get laid out is random, right? You're pulling from a deck, right? It felt like there were tough decisions here because you're trying to obviously grab your own character cards because a lot of those are really powerful, but you're also trying to deny your opponent. And based on where you set up as the lead player, controls to a degree where your opponent can go. So you might be trying to like make sure you go in a certain spot so that your opponent can't get a card that you know that they really want. But you're also trying to get the cards that you really want. And then you always know that one of those is going to be fought over. So I don't know. I thought that was a pretty cool mechanism. And the variability of strategy there was much deeper than I expected it to be initially, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
I think that's the heart of the game, actually, is that card draft in the grid. And, much like Seven Wonders Duel needing to have a different paradigm for a 2-player drafting game, this is basically what that is. You're drafting the cards, and having to pick the diagonal or the certain rows can really shift the way your opponent reacts.
Yeah, there's some really interesting plays you can make here. I agree with you, Daniel. I think this is the heart of the game, so I'm going to go into a little bit more details here too. I'll try to explain it because I know a lot of times our listeners are trying to imagine this in their head without seeing it on the table, right? So if you would, just imagine a 3x3 grid of cards. The top row is card 1, 2, 3, middle row 4, 5, 6, bottom row 7, 8, 9. So let's say that I'm paying attention and I know that Jason or Daniel, I think, really wants card number 6, right? It would work really good with our strategy. Well, I could claim row 4, 5, 6 or 3, 6, 9 and fight them for it, right? Like if they want it, they would have to overlap me on 6. That's one thing you can do. But one thing I thought was really interesting is, what if I took cards 1, 2, 3? Well, you might be saying, well, that doesn't stop him from taking 6. And you're right. He could take 3, 6, 9. But what if 9 is a useless card to him, right? What if it's one of my character cards that he can't use? Then I'm essentially forcing him to only take 2 cards instead of 3, right? So there is some cleverness here in how you lay out your tokens, and while getting what you want, but also thinking about what they want and hindering them or frustrating them or putting them in harder situations, I thought was just really clever with this token placement stuff. I feel like you should at least talk a little bit about the cards and the theme, Jason, or at least just kind of like the uniqueness of the cards, because you were just geeking when we were playing this, I feel like.
Yeah. Go ahead, Daniel.
Oh, I was going to say, as someone who hasn't read the book, it's basically like, okay, here are the resource gathering cards. Here are the player interaction cards, which are usually the characters. And then here are like the converters. So I am very interested in hearing your thematic insights to flesh it out a bit better.
Yeah, I don't know that it changes your insight in terms of mechanically how the cards work, because I think that's true, right? There's the basic cards that convert resources from one to the other or give you the basic resources, and then there's kind of the variants of the slightly stronger variants of those that are the character cards. I just thought it was interesting because they chose pivotal characters from the book that were allied with one side or the other, and some of them in particular, and even some of the neutral character cards, because there's neutral character cards, right? Gray ones. Even those were thematic, right? They were characters that weren't necessarily on either side. And so it was cool to read the characters and see how they influence stuff. Like there's Aliena, who's I'm not going to go into the story because it would take me too long, as Chris says, to explain who she is. But
it'd be boring.
But she allows you to get sheep and sell wool for a ton of money. And it's because in the book, she was a wool salesperson, right? And that's how she kind of filters into the game. Or there's one neutral one where I think it's Bishop Henry, and he shows up, and whichever player has more of their buildings built at the time gets a bonus, right? And it's because Walleran tries to stick it to Prior Philip by getting this neutral bishop to come in and see that they haven't made as much progress on the cathedral as they should have at that point and kill the project. And so Philip, being resourceful, goes out and rallies all the townspeople to come in and be working extra hard the day that the bishop shows up. And so it looks like they're doing this awesome job and making like tons of progress. And so it actually ends up hurting Walleran, right? So it's interesting how they made the cards thematic in that way, where they kind of fit how the story worked.
Yeah.
It doesn't change anything about the gameplay necessarily, but I enjoyed that aspect of it.
Yeah, one other thing I would mention, I'd be interested to hear y'all's thoughts on, if you have any, is the way they handle the first player. I think is pretty interesting in this game. So being first is pretty powerful because it guarantees that you're going to be able to select cards that you can use and want, right? If you're following, you still have some liberty in what you select, but remember, you have to intersect the first player's card row at some point, and so that limits you to a certain degree in what 3 cards you might be ideal for you, right? And so being first is great. The way that you regain being first and laying out first is actually by claiming a card on the board. And so that's another decision you have to make, because taking the first player, that's all it does for you. It just makes you first next round. It doesn't give you resources. It doesn't let you refine resources. It doesn't let you do anything. It just makes you first, right? And again, depending on where your opponent placed, getting that first player marker might cause you to take another card that you don't really care about, right? And so again, it's like, really want to be first, but I don't want these other cards that I will have to take that will require me to become first. Do I just let it go another round and try to make lemonade out of lemons based on where my opponent places in the line? I don't know. There's a nice tension there of when to try to grab the first player marker or when to just let it go and just try to make the best of it, that I enjoyed. I thought it was neat.
Yeah, I agree.
Or maybe it wasn't that interesting.
I think the last time I played this, someone hate drafted the first player in the sense that like made it be a battle, and that was real tough. Really needing that first player advantage after spending most of the game second player and then losing that battle. It was just like, man, that's painful.
And that's another good point. You can do that as first player. You can lay over top of it. Again, the trade-off there is you're giving up an action, right? You're only taking 2 actions instead of 3, but denying your opponent the opportunity to decide where they get the place in the next round. I mean, it's strong, right? It can be frustrating for sure. All right. Do y'all want to move into cons?
Yeah,
sure.
Let's do it.
All right.
I think one of the things that we found, Chris, when we were playing was that it did feel like as much variability as there is in that 3x3 card grid, it did feel like sometimes, just based on the luck of the draw and the way things come out, there could be that super row, right? That is just like the perfect arrangement of cards. And if you don't have the power token at that moment, or sometimes even if you do, like there's not really a way to block your opponent completely from getting that. It's like it gives them an iron and the ability to convert that iron into an ore, and like just this super sequence, right?
Right.
And we saw that a couple times, and that can be a little bit demoralizing, I think, when that happens.
Yeah, I think that's my biggest issue with the game is a lot of times there's only a single one of that specific type. Oh, I need this converter for my sheep to hit the wool to then be able to do the thing. Or, oh man, I need money, but the money cards haven't been coming out for the last round or two. So
yeah.
That's probably, my biggest frustration with it is because of the way the cards come out. You can be stymied in a way that feels not that you were outwitted, but just frustration
just out of your control.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the money cards, because at times, depending on how the cards come out, money can feel really tight in this game. And if the money cards all land in the same row, horizontally or vertically, and your opponent claims them, that can really hurt. Especially if you can't really fight them for it on the overlapping card, and they take in like 10 or 12 money and you don't take in any, that is tough. For sure. It can make you feel real behind, and you can fall behind that way.
The card decks are seeded, so at least they're in the sense that there's two ages. I forget what they're called, but you at least have two decks that you go through. So there is some sort of separation and minimal seeding there, but it's still definitely present and enough to be somewhat frustrating.
Yeah, and we've been talking a little bit about the fighting over cards. One thing I do want to return to in the cons, and I think we found this in our games too, at least the later ones, Jason, was the power of having a lot of seals when your opponent does not have many.
Mm-hmm.
You can get absolutely crushed if you fall way behind in seals in this game. And I'm talking like by a big disparity. And the only reason I'm bringing it out is there was one game where I was just intentionally doing it just to kind of see how it would go. And you have to take actions. There are cards on the board that if you claim them, you can buy seals, for example. Like you can spend 2 coins for every seal, and that's an investment. You're spending resources to do that. But the thing about the seals is when you use them to fight over cards, you have to remember you're getting 3 actions and your opponent is getting 2 if you're winning a lot of those battles. And in a game that is not going to last 12 rounds, probably. Okay? That's a game trigger, but most of our games ended before 12 rounds, right? It's usually like the 9 to 10 round range. If you're playing a 9 to 10 round game and 7 or 8 of those 10 rounds, you're taking 3 actions to their 2, you're going to win. I just don't see how you're not going to.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt like, yes, there are mechanisms built into where the winner has to spend all their seals. But here's the thing. If I have 5 or 6 neutral seals and you have 2, you're not going to spend both of those, right? You're going to spend 1 because you only get to keep 1. If you spend 2, you're just wasting that second one because you're not going to win, right? And so I don't know. It's hard to explain, but you can just find yourself in a position where if your opponent is just claiming a lot of them and you are not, you can feel kind of helpless and powerless to do anything because you're losing that contested card every time, especially when it really, really matters.
Yeah, I would agree with that too.
So you may be asking yourself, well, just don't let that happen. And I would agree with you. I think both players should try to stay equal in the seals, but then my concern, and we didn't play it enough times to test this out fully, but my concern with that is then what does it become at that point? We both have 4 seals and we both blow all 4 of our seals on one really critical card towards the end of the game. Then probably whoever wins that card is probably going to win, right? And so maybe it just kind of comes down to one big explosion there at the end to win that pivotal card. You know what I mean? I think the coin flipping thing is interesting, but it does introduce a couple of maybe problematic things to it that I was seeing in our plays. I'm welcome to anyone that might disagree.
No, I think these are all very valid points.
All right. Well, Any other things we want to pull out of this before we move on to final thoughts?
Sure.
Sure.
I'll start this time. Okay. All right. Final thoughts for Pillars of the Earth Builders Duel. I think there's some interesting things going on here, no doubt. The coin flipping for me was just kind of plus minus. I didn't hate it, but I wouldn't say I loved it either. It was interesting, but I could take it or leave it. But the selection of the cards in the game I found to be very interesting. Of fighting over the first player marker. Do I do it? Do I not? Where do I place? Where can I place to get what I want and also hinder my opponent in a 3x3 grid? I'm not saying it's the deepest thing ever, but there was a surprising amount of play there, in my opinion, that I really enjoyed. Not to mention, I felt like the cards, some of them are basic. You just get a resource, you refine a resource. That's not exciting. It's important, but not exciting. But the character cards, while being thematic, were also pretty interesting. Like they allowed you to do some pretty cool stuff, which in the right moment could be killers, right? Like there are just some cards that if you have it at the right moment with the right resources can really turn the tables for you. And I think that's a good thing. The problem I have with this game is what I was just talking about in the cons, and that's the seals. That the coin flipping mechanism and the variability on the seals is not my issue. It's the control of them that worries me in this game. If somebody just runs roughshod on them and controls them, they're going to win. I think I'm pretty convinced of that. So was it good enough for me to want to keep it? A 4 for me is a keep game for me. And I think, again, I hate it because I think there's good things here. But for me, it just barely misses the mark. I'm going to put this one also in the 3 category. I wanted to like it. I think there are a lot of people that will like this game. There are people in our group, Dan Smith comes to mind in particular, who we play with a lot, who love stuff like this. These random elements that you can't account for that kind of just mix things up. And that's great. But that's not something that I love. And so because of that, that just bumps this one down just a bit for me. So I'm going to fall into a 3 on this one.
Cool. All right. I think a lot of my thoughts actually align with yours, Chris. So I'm not going to rehash them. I enjoyed the theming of this one. I think we've established that.
Yeah.
I think anybody who's read the book is going to maybe get a little more out of that, obviously, than folks who haven't. I like the variety of the cards, the characters. That selection mechanism is really the core. I really enjoyed that part. The part about the seals, I don't know. We would have to play a little bit more to see if that like really bothers me.
Yeah.
Long term. But the coin flipping aspect of it, as much as it didn't break the game for me, but it wasn't my favorite battle resolution mechanism either. So I think all of that boils down to I was between a 3 and a 4 with this.
Yeah, me too.
Because I did enjoy playing it. And if somebody wanted to get it out and play it again, I would be like, all right, let's go. But whether or not it has long-term legs, I'm not sure, right?
Okay.
Cool.
All right, Daniel.
So it sounds like we're all pretty much in agreement in my Feld tier ranking. This is right around 19. So
is this in the high 20s, low 30s?
No, I actually have it ranked slightly higher than Arena Roma 2.
Oh wow.
Which is interesting because I'm debating giving this a 3. It's that fun factor like we talked about with the roller coasters earlier, where mechanically this may be less of a draw, but I'm having fun with it. I really like that card draft. The coin flipping battling is unique and fun.
Yeah.
And having played hundreds and hundreds of games, it's really nice to see something like, oh, this is something not like anything else I've played. For that, I like it. I like it enough to keep it around. I like that it's fast. I play a lot of 2-player, so for me, having a lot of these different 2-player games is a boon for me. Now, would I choose it over, 20 other Feld games? Probably not. So you don't do halves, 3.5. I should probably come down on a 3 for this. But I think if you like 2-player games, you should give this a shot. I think if you are into the theme at all, you should definitely give this a shot. If you like the full board game and want to try this like 2-player version of it, I think you should give it a shot. It feels very different, of course, but I think it's still got a similar sort of fun vibe in that it's approachable, it's fast, and there's enough strategy there without feeling bogged down. So that's how I feel about Pillars of the Earth Builders Duel.
Nice.
I think those are good thoughts. I think if you're new to the podcast, two things you need to know. As a group, we're not huge 2-player gamers. I don't dislike them. We just don't play them a lot, and that's probably affecting our review. And then Bill, one of our co-hosts, would say that Jason and I don't enjoy fun, which means that Jason and I think Jason, I'm speaking for him a little bit, but I think you'd agree. Both of us tend to have a low tolerance for randomness. And I think that's probably frankly affecting our review a little bit. Just like random elements sometimes are just a little bit of a turn off for us. But I can totally, same with Roma. I could totally see why people would like this. I get it. But the thing about the way we score on this podcast is not how I appreciate it as a design or how well I think other people will like it. And that's valid, but it's how well do I like it? And for me, it's just a 3. But I get why people would give it a 4 or higher.
And what's interesting about that, like randomness thing, is that when we play games that are on the more random side of things, I feel like that's where it falls back to the am I having fun or not factor, right? Both of these games, I had fun playing them.
Yeah.
And so that's why I gave Roma 4. This one, fell just slightly lower than the mark, but like I had fun playing both of them. And I think that's a hallmark of Feld and the way that he designs games, kind of going back to what we talked about in the beginning. There's just something about the way he designs games that makes them fun.
Totally.
Even if mechanically it's a game that I disagree with, right? So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, if you're intrigued to try Pillars of the Earth Builders Duel, I have good news. Again, there are several copies available at Noble Knight Games, our sponsor. Again, I don't have the discount code, hopefully in a few days, but check our Discord and our BGG Guild for that once it becomes available. There are also 20 copies on the BGG Marketplace as well.
Very easy to get.
Very. Pretty much, well, I take that back. A lot of Feld's games are easy to get, except for Strasbourg, which is his best game.
I had to go all the way to Athens, Greece to get my copy.
I got mine in Canada.
Yeah.
I found it on the floor of, how like in some this is a total aside, but I'm going to tell you, how you go in some board game stores and everything is like really organized and neat and all the shelves are like really well thought out and by category. This one I went to in Canada, there were just games laying on the floor. Like it was like Overstock Central. I mean, it was like a treasure hunt and I was excited.
That sounds fun.
This is where you find the good stuff. I was with my wife. I was like, babe, this is it. And I remember finding Strasbourg next to Wealth of Nations, which I was also thinking of picking up at the time. And thank God I didn't pick up Wealth of Nations because I played it since then and it is terrible. But Strasbourg is awesome.
Wealth of Nations. Ooh, 6.9.
Never heard don't of believe this game. That. Yeah, it's no good.
No.
Like economic markets and stuff.
And he hasn't really designed anything else of note, so. All right.
Well, those are our thoughts on Pillars of the Earth, Builders Duel.
And Strasbourg.
Gotta plug it every time.
You gotta plug it every time.
I love it.
All right. Emperor Trajan is planning the building of a monument for eternity, the Forum Trajanum. It will be the biggest and most magnificent emperor's forum the Roman Empire has ever seen. The building, now almost completed, is supposed to demonstrate Trajan's success as Optimus Princeps in an impressive way, but also foster the well-being and the glory of the honorable citizens of Rome. Each player governs a colonia, founded by Trajan himself, and thus is the head of one of the highest-ranking cities of the entire Roman Empire. While players are trying to optimally develop their own colonia, they must not fail to send envoys to Rome who report on the progress, contribute to the development of the Forum Trajanum, and with this, ensure support from Rome for the colonia.
I didn't know Trajan was an Autobot. So it turned into
that sounds like Optimus Prime. Yeah, it's kind of going for that. You know the guy that they use on all the movie previews with the same voice?
In a world. I think the Inner World guy died. Then it became the Inception. Brom.
That's right.
And then the piano version of a pop song.
Right.
And then now it's the like plink, plink of the high piano. Anyway.
Yeah. We try when Cameron's not here. We're just a bunch of fakers, bunch of pretenders, but we do our best. All right. Forum Trajanum, published in 2018. That's pretty recent for us on Hidden Gems. Not in 2005, 2018, published by Stronghold Games and also Hutch. At the time of this recording, its BGG ranking is 1,199. So again, not very far outside the top 1,000. That's actually a little higher than I was expecting, just based on what I had heard about this game before I played it. Obviously, we're playing this game for Daniel. He had requested to review this, but I would also mention that one of our guild members on our gem miners list in our BGG Guild, Who's Your Daddy, recommended that we review this game as well. All right. Brief rules summary for Forum Trajanum, and I want to just reiterate that fact that this rules summary is in no way comprehensive, okay? Not even close, actually. So what I'm hoping and banking on is that I'm going to hit the high points, and that if there's anything worth mentioning, we can fill in those rules gaps when we're going through our points, because it's just too much. This game is pretty rulesy. It's not hard to play, as you'll see when I go through it. The steps are not many, but the way that the game scores is numerous, and it's a lot to keep up with. Okay, so I'm just going to hit the high points. All right. So I think the first thing to understand is that there are two boards in Forum Trajanum. There is a central player board that's got a bunch of tracks on it, and then it's got a forum area where we're going to be placing our envoys. I'm not going to talk about that right now, but what I am going to talk about is your individual player board, okay? And that is your colonia. This is important. So every player in front of them will have a 6x6 grid of squares in front of them, okay? On 4 of these squares is pictured a temple, and this is like a neutral space. It's a dead space. You can't do anything with it. So you might be asking yourself, well, why is it there? To get in your way, and for one other reason we'll talk about in a second. On all of the other spaces of your colonia will be face-down tiles, okay, called colonia tiles. The backs of them are all the same, and then on the front sides, which are face down, are pictured resources, but you do not know what is on those resources when they're placed on the board. Okay, it is completely unknown. Okay, it's random. Also, within your 6x6 grid on your colonia, each column and each row has a symbol associated with it. So, for example, one row might be associated with the bridge symbol, whereas one column might be associated with chariot symbol. So why is that important? Well, let's start to talk about how you play the game. The first thing that you're going to do each turn is you're going to reveal 2 street cards. Okay, so you're going to flip 2 cards over, and there will be symbols on those cards, and they're going to correspond to the rows and columns that are pictured on your colonia that I was just mentioning. So what this means is, so let's say we flip the chariot card. I'm going to look down that row, and I'm going to select one of those colonia tiles to pull from that row. You may be asking yourself, how do I know which one to pull if they're face down and I don't know what's on the other side of them? That is a good question, and we will get back to that later. But just know you're pulling off one tile from each of the 2 cards that is flipped over. Once you have selected your tokens and looked at the resources on the other side of them, you're going to choose one. You're going to pass it to your right-hand neighbor. Your left-hand neighbor will be passing one of their 2 to you. Okay? So at the start of your turn, you're going to have 2 colonia tiles. You're going to choose one to take the resources. So it could be workers, could be builders, could be coins, could be many, many different things. You're going to choose one. Once you take those resources on your turn, you're going to build one time. So it's important to understand that when you are building, you can build a gray building or you can build a colored building. If you have gray builder meeples or tokens, you can spend them to build a building, and a building basically will allow you to move up one of 3 tracks, which gives you more resources or ways to score points, or will just score you points outright. It's important to understand, though, that when you build that building, you are placing that building into an empty space that you vacated when you pulled your colonia tiles off of your colonia during the street card phase. So remember, you flip the 2 cards over, you pull 2 tokens off. Those vacated spaces are where your building tiles go. That matters a lot when we get to scoring. Okay, so just tuck that away. If you build one of your colored workers a building, red, green, yellow, or blue, you take a matching building of that color, place it into an open spot in your colonia, and that lets you place an envoy, which is one of your tokens that you used, into your forum, which is the central board, which I'm not going to go into all the details of that right now. Now, once you've chosen a tile, taken resources, and built, you will do that 4 times per round, okay? And then at the end of each round, there are 3 rounds, there will be a scoring phase. I think it's important to talk about this really quickly because this is what you base all your decisions on. So first thing you'll do is you'll pay 1 coin per citizen. I didn't mention this, but when you're selecting your colonia tiles, some of them are citizens. If you use them as a citizen, they basically give you a benefit. They'll let you do something game breaking, like you can turn a worker into a coin or vice versa, or you can turn an assistant into a builder, just benefits. Okay. Once you pay for your citizens to keep them active, to continue to get that benefit from them, if you so choose, you score. You'll score for cranes. Cranes are in the corners of your colonia. If you uncover them, you will score those cranes depending on the number of colored buildings that match that crane. Next, you'll score for gray buildings. I think this is worth mentioning. You look in your colonia, and for every unique building that you have in a row, you'll score a point for that, times a multiplier depending on how many citizens are in that row. The only reason I go into a little more detail there is that's another thing that you think about when you're pulling colonia tiles out of your colonia, is to try to get those gray buildings in those rows for that scoring bonus. Then you will score for envoys that are in your forum. Again, those are tiles that go to the central board, and you're trying to basically create a really large connected blob of your tokens. And then lastly, and I think this is probably the most important thing, I may be jumping ahead here into our thoughts, but this could be a good jumping on point, are the Trajan tasks. At the end of each round, there are 3 cards that are evaluated. There's a top condition and a bottom condition. And for every time you meet the top and or bottom condition, you'll score a certain number of points for doing that. Okay. And it's important to understand you can see all of those at the start of the game. And many of those are based upon the arrangements of the buildings in your colonia. So again, the decision of what colonia tiles to pull off so that you open up spaces to where you can place buildings will hinge a lot upon what are those Trajan scoring cards asking you to do. So for example, a very simple one might be have a colored building above and below a neutral temple. So that might be something you should be thinking about when you're pulling tiles off. But remember, you can see 2 and 3 rounds ahead. So you might be preparing for the future when you're pulling your tiles off too. I'm going to stop there. That was actually quite a bit, but I left out probably 60% of the rules. Okay. But I think that is enough to get us going to talk about how we felt about this game. Starting off. So when this game first came out, I would say, and I remember this, Daniel and I and Jason were talking about this before we got on air. This game was not super well received when it first came out. It was not one that people were raving about. They're like, oh, this is kind of a miss for Feld. It's not as good as his other designs, yada, yada. And I think that because of that, it lost a lot of traction. And I think a lot of people probably just never played it, despite the fact that he's such a prominent designer, because it wasn't really well received. And a lot of those reviewers were really stuck on, you have these colonia tiles that are face down, you flip them over, you see these resources and like trying to decide, what do I pass? What do I keep? You know, how significant that phase of the game is. My question to you would be, did you feel that same kind of frustration with the colonia tiles and deciding what to keep, what to pass, what resources you're gathering, or were there other parts of the game that you felt to be more interesting to you as a player?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned some of those reviews. I think there are 2 factors that sort of led to the initial reception of this game. And one is it came out at the same time as Carpe Diem, which I think overshadowed it a fair bit. I do like Carpe Diem better than this, but I think it overshadowed it to the point where Forum Trajanum didn't quite get its fair shot. I know I didn't give it as good of a shot as it maybe deserved, because I'm surprised to hear you say that I requested this, because my recollection of this is that you insisted on this game, and that actually made me revisit it and find a newfound appreciation for this game. Because actually,
you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. I do appreciate it.
This was probably my attempt to get games off of my incredibly insane shelf of shame, games I've never played, but yes.
No, it's a good thing to have happened, because initially I had kind of heard, oh, okay, this is the hook, the Colonia tile draft and what to decide. And especially at 2-player, those decisions aren't very interesting. I maybe only pay attention and like, oh, this is a citizen tile. The citizen tiles, for the most part, unlock special abilities, and so they can be very valuable, and you probably don't want to get rid of them. But sometimes if I'm going to meet that Trajan card, I really need this other tile. So I would say those are when that draft matters. Most of the time it didn't feel consequential, and I was most focused on those Trajan goal cards, the round cards, and I found a lot of satisfaction and fun in trying to maximize those, and timing those were really the hook of the game for me.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that drafting element, it's not a completely insignificant part of the game, but it's definitely not the core of it either.
Yeah.
I did find myself thinking about it and needing to consider, okay, well, I really need another tile to come to me. What can I keep? What can I pass? There is a decision there, but there's so many other factors at play here. And I think we've kind of universally mentioned these goal cards at the end. Those are definitely, I think, the central element.
Yeah.
But what makes the game interesting is all of the numerous factors that go into meeting those goals, right? There's so many different tension points here.
They're challenging.
One thing that I want to call out that I particularly enjoy in games, and in this one in particular, is whenever there's a scoring category where you need to do X, Y, and Z to acquire points in that category, but at the same time, there is some additional mechanic layered on top of that you also need to manage that controls the value of that category. So the little slider bar at the top that moves across, right?
Very cool.
I mean, it's difficult to move that slider bar.
Yes.
Right? But it's critical moving that bar in order to make the other things that you're doing actually valuable.
Or
and
is
I love
it?
that tension.
Put another way.
Or is it? I don't know. Yeah.
Put another way, for those who haven't played it, this slider bar sits at the top of your player board, and it will determine your personal scoring for these goals. So even if you happened to score it, if your slider bar is not as high up as it could be, you will be scoring less. So trying to move the slider bar up is in many ways a score multiplier. And I found that part of the game really exciting.
So Chris, you said, or is it? So I'm curious.
Yes. And I'm not being contrarian. I'm actually just, this is a good thing that I mentioned this. I agree with you that getting that slider bar moving is really strong. And when I first played it the first couple of times, I was worried if it maybe was the most important thing and it was all that matters. But having played it more times, I played this game a lot. It is not. I'm not saying you can entirely ignore it, but it does not need to be preeminent for you to be successful in this game. And that was something that came clear to me the more that I played it. And a lot of it, again, and this is what you were saying, Daniel, a lot of it hinges on those Trajan scoring cards, right? That slider bar, it does increase the value of your Trajan scoring cards, but it also increases the value of your blob. We've been talking about this a lot, the central blob of connected people that you send to the forum in the central of the board. You do that by placing a lot of colored buildings in your colonia. The Trajan cards, depending on what come out, may not incentivize you to build a lot of colored buildings. You may be building a lot of gray buildings with builders, right? And so in games that are set up that way, you could still try to move that bar up and it would be valid, but you could maybe ignore it, right? And try a different path by doing a lot of builders, right? And so the reason I'm saying all this without getting too much into the minutia is I think there are multiple paths to victory here. It's a phrase we use a lot on this podcast as a good thing, right? If a game falls into a pattern of repeated play that shows itself to be superior, that is a killer for us. Gone. Done. If a game starts to do that. And I had worried that this game was going that way. And I think that if you only play it a couple of times, you could make yourself think that. But on repeated plays, we were like, whoa, actually, there's a lot going on here to where you can make up that point difference other ways and actually do much better, right? So the slider bar matters, but it may not necessarily be preeminent depending upon the layout of the board and the cards and all that. There's a lot to think about. I see Daniel shaking his head a lot. I would like to hear what he says.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that because your experience mirrors mine so closely in that first time I played, it seemed, oh, gotta hit that slider bar. And then the next time, my wife didn't move the slider bar at all and just crushed me with these really powerful citizen rows.
Yes.
Just
with
hammering the row
buildings.
scoring.
Yep.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, man. Okay. And so then I pivoted to that, and then I lost to big blobs. And I was like, I love seeing those pivots, and it's exciting feeling like there's continually more to discover here when coming back.
Yeah, the balance between the central board and deploying to your blob versus focusing on your personal board, which is also has its own scoring and tends to play more into the end game scoring cards. I liked that tension because that blob scoring can be huge.
Oh man,
but it's a trade-off.
Jason's first game of this, he killed us with that. I mean, you had like this massive blob and you pushed your bar all the way to the end and just scored huge on that.
Yeah, I always win the first game when nobody's figured out what to do yet, but then after that I don't win ever again.
One more thing I want to mention about the Trajan cards. I know I keep coming back to this. They seem like a small part, and they are, I guess in a way they are, although I do feel like they frame your strategy for the game. But the first couple of times we played this, at least for me, I was like, okay, if I can do the top scoring parameter and the bottom scoring parameter once per round, I'm feeling pretty good, right? Maybe twice in the final round. But in our most recent play, this was, I think it was my 4th or 5th play, I scored that bottom card, I think 3 times on the top and 4 on the bottom. And so I think what I'm saying, I'm not trying to toot my own horn. Honestly, I'm not. I'm just saying that the more that you play this game, the better you're going to get at it because you get better at the planning. And there is a ton of planning in this game. There is no wasted action in this. Everything you do matters, right? Again, you can't see what resource you're getting, but what space you're vacating every turn really matters. And then what resources you choose, while I don't think it's critical, does matter, right? From like a planning standpoint. And just all the little steps involved in which colored workers do I need? Do I need a builder? What citizens should I take? Will all come together in you landing a really awesome final round if you know what you're doing. And it requires really careful planning. And I love that kind of stuff in games. Really do. You can see yourself getting better at it as you play it.
Yeah, that aspect of hammering those cards, I want to highlight because I love when games offer you the opportunity to maybe forego current scoring for future plans. So like in Lorenzo Il Magnifico, there's this track that you're climbing up, and if you haven't hit this certain point, you can choose to honor the church and score these points, or you will be excommunicated and have a permanent bad negative power for the rest of the game. But sometimes it doesn't matter so much, and you can roll with that. So similarly here, you can just be like, you know what, screw round 2, I'm not even focusing on that card, but come round 3, I'm going to hit that card so many times. And I just really enjoy that aspect.
Totally agree with what you just said. Yep.
All right. Okay. Well, some pretty positive thoughts so far. Anything that stood out that we didn't enjoy maybe as much?
I think of these 3 games, this is easily the least thematically grounded.
Yes.
Yeah, there's no theme here. It could have been anything.
Yeah. If I didn't make it clear from the rules, or if you haven't figured out, this game is thoroughly point salad. I don't say that's pejorative. I don't mind point salad. I'm just saying it's just points on points on points. And like Daniel was saying, this could be anything. The Rome theme, whatever. You know, it's neither here nor there.
I would say anything, and yet they chose Rome.
It's a winner, you know.
I do really like the Michael Menzel art. I think he's one of my favorite board game illustrators. It's always a treat having a visually pleasing Feld game. All too rare.
I will say one con for me. So if you're new to the podcast, I think people that have been listening to it a while know my personality and my style. I do not shy away from games that make me hurt and put me in some pain if it's fair. and it's equally applied to all players. And it puts me in a situation where I'm like, dang it, I can't do everything I want to do. And then I have to decide, what am I going to give up, right? The one thing about this game that pulls it back a little bit for me is I do feel like this game allows for a lot of contingency plans, which for a lot of people will be a pro. Again, this is a personality thing, but if you're like me and you don't like everything to come really easy, this game, I think, took the teeth off a little bit when it probably didn't need to. So I'll give you some examples. So for example, let's say you really need a gray builder and you don't have one. Well, you can take 2 colored workers and turn it into a gray builder. Well, let's say you don't have a colored builder that you really need. Well, you can take an assistant and turn it into the color that you need. Well, let's say a street card flips over and it makes you take a token off somewhere where you don't want to take a token off. You can play a white token called a Tribune and ignore that card. These things sound like good things on the surface, and for some people they will be, but for me, it's too many release valves to just let me have my way too much. Don't give me my way all the time, right? Like, I feel like once I started to get good at this game, I could kind of just make it work out every round by manipulating all those contingency plans he built in. And while it feels good for your plan to work out, I don't know, I just felt like I was kind of cheating in a way. You know what I mean? Again, I think this is a me thing, but if you're like that, you should know that he gives you a lot of release valves for the tension, if that makes sense.
I mean, I agree with you. I wouldn't say it's a lot of release valves. You still got to work pretty hard to make things happen in this game. And I mean, I see why he did it too, right? Because most of those things are things that happen due to randomness, right? You don't know what you're going to pull on your draws. You don't know what's going to be passed to you in the draft. You don't know what 2 cards are going to get flipped. And I get what you're saying, right? Make it slightly more painful. Make it so that maybe you can't. I mean, I guess what would that accomplish, right? It would accomplish, well, you can't hit that 3rd card 7 times, right? Because the ability to manipulate it that way, once you get good enough at it, is just not going to be there. And that has its pluses and minuses too, right? Because then it's like, well, even if you do become expert level at this game and you learn how to play it really well and plan, which is the whole purpose of the game, then there's this like mitigating factor in there now of randomness that says, well, no, you can't, because you're going to get stuck with these 2 cards that get flipped over that aren't the ones that you wanted, right? So I think there's pluses and minuses on both sides of that equation.
But if it's happening to everybody, it's just a style thing. It's like, who can make the most of this bad situation, I guess is what I'm saying.
But it's not a bad situation for everybody, right? Not in this game,
I was going to say,
depending on what else you've done throughout the game so far.
And the player board rows are different. So a flop that might be really bad for you could be great for me.
Sure.
I tend to agree with what you're saying. I'm definitely in the more pain, tighter camp of games, but I think it's important to give perspective for this in that, yes, this is maybe a more rounded edge Feld design, but that's in comparison to a lot of his harsher, older games
Notre
like
Dame.
Macau or Notre Dame or Strasbourg, right? That can be really brutal.
Yeah.
So I think in the modern context of 2018, I think this is relatively challenging and will, for a modern Euro player, feel spiky enough. That being said, it's still a little more rounded edges than I also would prefer, which is why it's not like a favorite Feld for me.
Sure, right. Same. It's a minor con.
All right. Anything else?
I'm ready.
Wrap up with final thoughts.
Yeah.
Should I kick us off this time?
Start us off.
Like Chris has said, Chris and I tend to be kind of masochistic when it comes to gameplay. This one made me think a lot more than most other Felds that I've played. I'm not as widely played for Feld as Daniel, for sure.
Same.
Perhaps some others. Aside from Strasbourg, I couldn't think of another Feld game that made me think as hard as this one did. I've played Merlin once, and that one was pretty thinky too, but it's been a long time since I played it. And
Daniel gave a big thumbs down on Merlin.
I'm sorry, I do not like Merlin. I rated Merlin a 4 out of 10.
Yeah, I want to revisit that one, not to get too off on a tangent. I want to revisit it because I remember enjoying it when I played it, but
Yeah, me
I
too,
also
actually.
have since then read everybody kind of kibosh it. And I've only played it once, so I need to go back to it.
Defenders of it will say it is improved with the Arthur expansion. It is improved. It is not saved with it. I think Merlin embodies all the negative things about point salad. When people are saying point salad in a negatory sense, I think Merlin is a great example of that, because it feels like you're doing a lot of itty bitty things and ultimately nothing matters, because all these different things you were doing and different people were doing all kind of end up as a wash. And I really don't like that. And there's like a million different ways to mitigate every little thing. And anyway, Merlin tangent.
Yeah. No, the only thing I remember from that game is that it felt like it took too long.
That is another massive negative mark on it. Yep.
Anyway, aside done. Back to this review. This one made me think a lot, and I liked that. There were tensions all over the place. Do you focus on the center board, the outer board, or your player board, moving the slider bar versus making stuff happen on the board, the player powers that we just talked about, or the citizen powers. I was honestly between a 4 and a 5 on this one, surprisingly. I think I'm going to settle on a 4, but I could see playing this more, it improving as I learn more of the depth that's there. It's a highly rated 4 for me. I think is where I'm going to land.
That's our 4.5. That's
definitely
how we
want to play it some more. I guess the con would be that like it's not going to be a game that I'm going to be in the mood to play all the time, right? Because it is more.
It's brain burnery,
right? But solid 4. Enjoyed it.
Daniel?
Yeah, this is a solid 4 for me too, probably on the higher end. I'm pretty stingy when it comes to ratings, though. So, I mean, I can probably only think of 5 or 6 games I would give a 6 to on the scale. Okay. So, right. So like I'm stingy.
Cool. Yeah.
Maybe more than I should be. But yeah, I enjoy it. I think it's great. There are still 15 other Feld games that I prefer. So I like it. I keep it. I'll play it. It just doesn't quite reach the heights of some of his other games for me.
Yeah, nice. I will throw one more point in there since we've been talking about this whole fun factor thing. I think there's an element of that in my rating of this too. Like as much as mechanically, I think it's maybe closer to the 5 side of things and enjoy that aspect of it. There's something intangible in the fun factor on this one. I don't know, maybe it's yet another rum theme or something, but something intangible in that fun factor that just wasn't quite there. So maybe it's because Chris beat me every time, but that's what it is.
That might have affected my final rating. I don't know. But yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned, just to give our listeners kind of a feel for how you do things, Daniel, that, you said you would only rate maybe 5 or 6 games a 6 on our scale. And I have been criticized, and it's very fair, that I tend to be more favorable towards scores. I would say, and this is personal, there's nothing wrong with it. For me, I would say, just based on how I am, there are probably about 30 games I would give a 6 to. But when you've played hundreds, it's less than 5%. But that's kind of how I fall. So I tend to shift a little bit higher in my liking of games. Having said that, I was sure I was going to give this game a 4 after my second or third play of it. I was enjoying it a lot, but I was worried that the slider bar may be a little too strong and getting that moving and getting a really big blob. But this is the value of playing things several times. The last time we played it, the way those Trajan cards came out really changed the game to such a degree that made the slider bar almost irrelevant in some ways, to where I was like, okay, there's more going on here than I thought. Not to mention the fact that I did just a whole lot better scoring that final round card than I normally do. And that's just because I was just understanding the game better and seeing the layers and layers of planning that go on here. Even in round 1, doing things or thinking about things for round 3. And for me, that's good. That's good stuff. If I'm thinking about round 3 and round 1, the final round, that's good. I really like planning in games, and this game, I think, kills it in that regard. And I think the Trajan cards, the way that they come out and the way they can change up your strategy to where you can't come into game night saying, I'm going to try this tonight, or I'm going to try this strategy tonight. No, you look at the board and you see what the Trajan cards are, and then you decide what you're going to do, right? That's good. So all those things together, I'm going to say I think this game is excellent. I love this game. I'm going to give it a 5. I think it's really, really good. Is it the best Feld? No, but it's up there for me. I haven't played as many as Daniel, but I like this game and would love to play it again. I just really enjoyed it. So Forum Trajanum for me is going to get a 5.
Just
Nice.
so I kind of get where you guys are at with the Feldosphere. You both have played. You both have played Trajan, right? At least.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Great.
I like Trajan more than this game.
Yes, definitely. Trajan's a masterpiece. I don't think either of you have played Bonfire or Marrakesh yet, right?
Too new.
Right. Well, they are very brand new, and I think both of those games have those elements that would appeal to you guys a lot. I like Marrakesh better than Bonfire, but
Okay.
I both think that they are thinky, they are planny, they have a lot of really cool melded elements that would be a strong recommend for me for you.
Yeah.
Cool.
Marrakesh,
It's interesting because I
especially.
feel like when Bonfire came out, it was really hot, and then it kind of did that thing where people kind of double taked and were like, I'm not too sure I like this game anymore.
It's funny because for me, when I first played it, I was not hot on it. It was probably 22 out of 32 for me, and it has climbed up to 11.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The more I played it, and the thing that made it click for me was a paradigm shift of, oh, this is what the game is about, is the player-controlled endgame trigger. It's really a race. And once I realized how much power you have in putting a chokehold on your opponents and like, nope, the game is going to end right here. This is how I'm going to do it. And setting off a cascade
No more
of
points
really
for
cool
you.
combos. Yeah, I was like, oh, okay, I'm into this. And there's a lot of depth to explore there. I like it a lot now. But a lot of these heavier, more strategically deep games require revisits, and I think that's what's really cool about what you guys do is you give games a real fair shake.
Nice. Thanks, man.
All right, let's wrap this thing up.
All right. Well, where can you get
another thought that you want to throw in there, Daniel?
Oh, I mean, feel free to cut this because this is kind of gushy, but I'm so stoked to be on this podcast because it's pretty rare to see gaming tastes so aligned, and the media sphere. I mean, I like the Dice Tower, I like Shut Up and Sit Down, I love Board Game Barrage, but I think you guys probably have the closest tastes to mine, which is just really exciting because it's like finding a friend who loves the same band.
That's right.
I'm still going to go look up Microwave now.
Yeah.
No, we appreciate you saying that, and it's really awesome having you on. And like I mentioned earlier at the beginning, you've been almost from day one a really good supporter, and it was encouraging to have your support when we were fledgling and felt like just total frauds, and you were just like, yeah, just keep posting, you're doing great. And yeah, it's just really cool having you on.
Cult of the Classic.
That's exactly right. There's some good games back here, trying to get people to believe it.
Exactly.
All right. Well, if Forum Trajanum sounds interesting to you, there are copies available on Noble Knight Games, so you can get that there at our sponsor. And there are 61 copies on the BGG Marketplace, so no problem getting this one. Any Feld game, with the exception of maybe It Happens, is pretty easy to get and pretty reasonably priced. Have you played It Happens, Daniel?
I have. That is a kid's game through and through.
It was not very good, was it?
No, it's not. It is 31 for me.
Out of how many?
32. So
32. What is 32? Is it that other 2-player game, that weird one?
Revolution of 1828?
Yeah.
It probably should be, but I have Jorvik as 32.
What?
I know, man.
Jorvik is good.
Do you want to get into this? Because
I do want
into this.
I'm offended right now.
Good.
Is Jorvik the remake
of the Speakerstadt?
Speakerstadt.
Yeah.
It's the queuing game.
I don't like that game either.
Where you stand in lines. Oh, that's terrible. I hate
Solidarity, Jason.
you. Okay. Both terrible.
I think, Feld made a terrific auction game, one of the best auction games ever in Strasbourg. Yet another plug. And this is sort of the opposite. My experience with Jorvik was a painfully long game with a lack of decisions. What I love about Feld games is literally every turn I'm getting interesting decisions thrown at me, and it's like, oh, this is cool. Oh, this is interesting. Have I thought about this? Consider this. And with Jorvik, there's just not a whole lot there on the bone. It promises this exciting, bumping of the workers in line. Mm-hmm. It's not as interactive as it sounds like it could be. It's also just kind of boring. You're just lining up to get these things.
It is a queuing game.
Yeah, a game about getting in line. I don't know, man. It was so disappointing.
When you say it like that, it does sound bad.
I love Feld. I love Feld games, but Jorvik is not one of those.
Oh man, maybe we need to play it again. It's been a while, Jason, but I remember liking it. But maybe no,
because I had played Speakerstadt online a couple times
on Yukata,
and then you pulled that one, and I was like, okay, maybe I'll like this better in person or something. No, didn't fix it. Still bad.
We'll agree to disagree on that one.
Hey, at least it's 2 against 1 here.
That's all right. All right. Well, Daniel, it's awesome to have you on the podcast, man. We really, really appreciate it. It's been super fun. And I would remind our listeners that you can hear a little bit more of Daniel if you want to on our Backstage podcast. Again, all you need to be is a Patreon subscriber. We're going to talk about BGG games 11 through 20. If you want to hear more of his thoughts, it's been a good time.
Thanks for being here, man. It's been good to meet you. Good to get your thoughts on these Feld games.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Daniel, real quick before we wrap up here, if people want to find you on Instagram or on the interwebs, where can they do that?
Yeah, so Instagram's the best spot. I am the game table. Very easy, straightforward. I love chatting games. I love making friends there, like you guys. I like people who have come and stayed at my house from Germany, like people I meet up at cons with. So, find me on Instagram, the game table. That's the best spot. The other thing is every year I put out a ranked list with a bunch of mini reviews for all the new to me games that I play every year. And
this is good stuff.
That takes a lot of time and effort, and not as many people as I know about it. So if that sounds fun to you, go check that out on Board Game Geek as well.
I've seen your lists.
Thanks.
It's good.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us for this episode of Hidden Gems. If you like what we're doing here, remember that it's a huge help to us if you give us a rating or review on your podcast platform of choice, or follow us on one of our many social media platforms. Check out the BGG Guild if you want to interact with us or share a game that you feel is a hidden gem. And if you're so inclined, please consider supporting the show over on our Patreon at patreon.com/Hidden Gems Podcast. Till next time, I'm your host, Jason.
This is Chris.
And I'm Daniel.
Thanks for listening.
This episode of Hidden Gems, number 60, was recorded in Raleigh, North Carolina, and the San Bernardino, California area for Daniel on March the 2nd, 2024. Wizards, dragons, loot, healing potions, magic missile. If you're anything like us, well, at least like Cameron and myself, those words evoke feelings of adventure and excitement. Join us again in 3 weeks as we dive into the amazing world of fantasy-themed board games. Will Jason join us in the over-the-top fantasy role-playing fun? Tune in to find out. Hidden Gems is produced and edited by Chris Alley, Cameron Lockey, and Jason Yanchuleff. Our Board Game Geek Guild is monitored and managed by honorary Hidden Gems team member Ghidorah. Our Discord channel is monitored and managed by honorary Hidden Gems team member Snoozefest. Our show's logo was illustrated by designer and artist Caitlin Nieto. Check out her work on Instagram at It's Caitlin Nieto. We would love to hear from you. Feel free to join the discussion on our many social media accounts. You can find us on Facebook at Hidden Gems Board Game Podcast, Instagram at hiddengems.podcast, and X at Hidden Gems Board. Disagree with one of our reviews? Have something you want to say about one of the games we discussed today? You can also make your voice heard on our Board Game Geek Guild at BoardGameGeek.com, guild number 3874. Once again, thank you for joining us on Hidden Gems, and until next time, fellow gem seekers, enjoy your games and enjoy your search.